Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Plan Committee. I'm the Chair, Councillor Martin Goss. To begin the meeting, there are a few housekeeping matters which I'll get through very quickly. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening. So if you hear a fire alarm, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Runwald Street. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Council's YouTube channel and will be available to view after the meeting. We'll start with introductions of the committee and also officers. So I've already introduced myself, so I'm Martin Goss, I'm the chair of the meeting and this committee this evening, and we will start by going to my right. So Kaylee, if you'd like to present and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Councillor Kaylee Rippingale, Deputy Chair of the Local Plan Committee.
And then if we can go across the road to Councillor Arnold.
I'm Councillor Arnold and I stand for Stanway.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John.
Councillor Jocelyn Law for Highwoods.
Councillor Sam McLean representing Newtown and Christchurch. Councillor Darius Laws from Rural Ward North, and this evening I'm here substituting for Councillor Patricia Moore.
Councillor Lewis Barber from Lexington and Braeswick Ward.
Councillor William Sunnocks from Rural North.
Okay, and then officers. So if we want to start right at the end and work round, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Barker. I'm Strategic Director for Policy in Place.
Bethany Jones, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager.
Karen Sire, Place and Planning Lead Officer.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
Thanks, that's everyone that's introduced themselves. So I think it's really, really important tonight that this is going to be, there'll be a lot of listening, a lot of debating. So I just would ask that everybody uses speakers, uses their microphones clearly so everybody can hear, because this is a large room and to project your voice takes a bit of effort. So please, let's make sure everyone can hear what we're saying, no mumbling. Let's be really clear and concise this evening, please. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access the meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. Can I also ask all committee members have their mobiles turned at least to silent, so again it doesn't disturb the meeting if you get text messages or whatever from your families. Right, we may have a break at 8 o'clock subject to the timing of how the meeting goes, and that will be down to discretion of the chair. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop is in this room. Councillor Gerard Oxford has sent his apologies to the meeting. The main passenger lift in the building broke over the weekend, which has meant he's been unable to access the meeting. The council is urgently looking to resolve the access issue. So we've already mentioned that substitutions are taking place, although it was meant to be Councillor Willits, but it's now Councillor Laws. There are no urgent items. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody needs to raise that hasn't already been recorded? I'm not aware of any, and no one's indicating. Item 5, we will have your say. So the arrangements for tonight is that we allowed for up to 10 speakers, 3 minutes each, so that's 30 minutes of residents from Colchester or beyond, and then we have a number of visiting councillors as well. So members are asked to note that as chair I've amended the have your say session to actually allow for longer than 15 minutes, and it's been doubled, so at least everyone should hopefully feel they can have their say, and obviously they get their 3 minutes. We will be quite strict about that 3 minutes. Furthermore, it should be noted that visiting councillors will be allowed to speak and have unlimited time to do so, although we have obviously got the meeting to get through as well. And finally, a statement has been received by Will Quince, which will get read out by one of the officers tonight. So we will start with have your say.
Chair, apologies for interrupting. We need to do the minutes of the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, no problem. So the minutes of the meeting from December the 13th last year, because meetings didn't occur after that. Is there any issues that anyone wishes to raise, or do you believe they are a true matter of public record so they can be signed off? Okay.
Am I last man standing? Yeah, they looked fine to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. That's appreciated. They will be signed off after this meeting as a true and fair record. So we will move on to have your say. I will just go through and confirm the attendees this evening in order that I will call them. So we've got Mr. Simon Collis, but I don't think he's here yet. We've got Mr. Richard Martin. We've got Mr. Richard Kilshaw. We've got Mr. Andrew Wilkinson. We've got Grace Dark. We've got Lisa Cross. We've got Sir Bob Russell. Got Mr. Nick Chilvers, Mr. John Acker, and then William Jolliffe. They are the 10 speakers I've got down this evening. And then I have the statement from Will Quince. Then we've got Councillors Gocher, King, Scordis and Fox in that order. So we will move straight to Richard Martin to have your say, as I believe Mr. Collis is not here yet. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes and
Right.
you will hear a bell at 2, just to tell you you've got 1 minute left.
First, I'd like to say thank you for the committee for your time tonight. I've been using Middleweight Ranges for over 30 years now, living very close to on Abbots Road. I'm there, a number of dogs there, walked in rain, sleet or snow, and the loss of this area, this area to people of Colchester would be catastrophic. The last large open space for the residents of the area to actually go anywhere of that size for recreational purposes within walking distance. If this plan is approved, it will now involve the use of cars or the use of trying to get 2 buses and wasting hours for connecting services. I'm not going to go on about biodiversity or ecology, as there's far more qualified people here at this meeting than me. But from what I've learned through this process brings the thought of Neville Chamberlain holding up a bit of paper in 1939 saying there will be peace in our time. But instead on that bit of paper, it's saying biodiversity net gain does work. Officers and councillors have been saying since this process that the houses have to go somewhere. Before Middleweight, they did. The fields next to Bullock Wood were already in the planning process, now strangely completely missing despite there being a preferred site at the time. Other sites had their allocations reduced. So there would have been no need for Middleweight to be allocated apart from it saved a few votes for certain councillors. Just before this process began, Middleweight was extended as a wildlife site in 2015. That should have raised some flags with the council and its officers to have a close look at the site before its inclusion. That would have thrown up some indications to why it should not have been included. And it seems that some people were hell-bent on its inclusion regardless of whatever evidence was presented before it. On the initial appraisal, well, more of a tick box exercise, to be honest, it was saying things like it will prevent building on green space, when the first thing it will do was rip up 86 hectares of rare grassland. Even back in 2008, when the MOD wanted to turn the Wick into a massive recycling plant, it was chucked out on the basis of too much traffic and the fact that wildlife site and the prospect of becoming a triple SI. Recently, there has been a U-turn on the planting of trees on the Meadowfield in Highwoods. The same experts that you have listened to that in their expert opinion of the planting of trees in that field is an act of ecocide. These same experts, some are here tonight, will also tell you that Middlewick is wrong. Lastly, I would like to ask all the councillors if they have read the 650-page agenda report allowing to make a proper informed decision on tonight's vote. If you have not, then how can you make an informed decision and not just on what officers tell you they want? The committee should defer any decision until all the councillors have read the agenda pack and a final decision can then be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for speaking. What we're going to do is we'll feed back at the end of all the public speakers so that we can do it in one block, because it will be much easier to cover if that's okay. But thank you. So we have Mr. Kilshaw next, please, for 3 minutes of Have Your Say. So again, if you can just speak clearly into the mic, you will get a bell at 2 minutes. Just press the button, just press the button. That's it.
I got it.
Right, you've now got 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Richard Kilshaw. I have a degree in Conservation Management, Biological Survey, and I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. When considering Section 2 of Local Plan, it's vital that you understand the Ecological Evidence Base report produced by the MOD fails to provide adequate evidence, and what it does provide is undermined by the many survey limitations it contains. These inform the reader how assessment has been compromised, but note it's the responsibility of the reader, Colchester Borough Council in this case, to understand the significance of these limitations. Examples include survey of recently cut grassland, parched vegetation, undertaken outside of acceptable survey periods, non-existent or woefully inadequate surveys for rare protected reptiles, birds and invertebrates, applying a simple walkover survey that dismissed most of the build footprint as poor semi-improved grassland, which independent survey using industry standard MVC, National Vegetation Classification Survey methods, recognises semi-natural, neutral grassland, an important reservoir for biodiversity, and represents priority habitat lowland meadow. It uses a questionable, the report uses a questionable biodiversity net gain metric, and obviously the under-evaluation of existing habitats contributes to a favourable B&G score. The mitigation hierarchy is ignored, jumping straight to compensation for the loss of priority habitat dry acid grassland. Compensation is supposed to be a last resort. And although this compensation is recognised as a key ecological consideration in Middleweight's allocation in the report, the example they used to demonstrate how this can be achieved had very different aims, very different baseline conditions, making the desired outcome highly unlikely and certainly unlikely within the time frame. They failed to consider alternative sites, although this could be easily resolved by building on the compensation area instead of Middleweight. The above issues and more are clearly laid out in the report that you've been asked to accept as supporting housing allocation on Middleweight. And as you're aware, the strength of feeling against development here ensures your actions today won't be forgotten. And if you adopt this, it's not going to go away. Failures to follow procedure will leave CBC open to legal challenges, and we will fight this all the way. As demonstrated by other councils, you can choose to reject, delay, and revise Section 2 local plan, and I urge you to do so. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide any further details on the ecological issues or the proposed compensation scheme, if you like.
Thank you. That's your 3 minutes, and we'll respond in bulk at the end, if we may. Next speaker is Andrew Wilkinson. So you have 3 minutes. If you can speak clearly into the mic, you'll hear a bell at 2 just to tell you you've got a minute left. Okay. Can you press the button?
Thank you. I'm not going to make arguments today like the other speakers. All I'm going to say is a statement of facts. We've been communicating with councillors, and I just want to make everybody who's watching this aware of what the facts are as I see it. LP1 has been adopted, and you already have more than a 5-year land supply from existing commitments, which is what you need to have to prevent speculative development. There appears to be a misconception that the planning inspector is endorsing this local plan. He is not. He is stating it meets the minimum legal requirements. We all know the housing target of 920 homes per year would have to be revised up if the local plan 2 was not adopted. Apparently, the new figure will be 1150. I urge everyone to look at this figure and question legitimate ways in which this can be reduced. Other councils have reduced that figure, and so did Colchester Borough Council. We have been informed that a new local plan for Colchester could take up to 2 years. However, most local plans take between 13 and 24 months, and the average amount of time in England is 19 months. Some have completed their new local plans within 7 months. However, most of the Colchester plan is now in place, so should take less time. The local plan does not have to be adopted until the end of 2023, so you do not have to adopt it now, and you can investigate other options, most notably looking at the other sites and reassessing the housing allocation figures. It is stated that having a local plan prevents speculative development. That is why Middleweight was added. This is an endorsement in effect by Colchester Borough Council, yet we are told if Middleweight had not been put into the local plan, they could have gone to appeal and built on it anyway, so it makes you question what the value of the local plan is. In the Housing Land Position Statement, it states a conservative approach has been applied to windfall allocations. Let's not apply a conservative approach. We have had far more windfall properties than were predicted. According to the plan, housing needs at 920 per annum, we only needed to build 14,720. This plan delivers 15,970. 1,250 more than we needed to. Who thought this was a good idea, particularly as it increases housing targets for the future? Why is the council even considering this approach? Irrespective of today's discussion, you need to redefine your strategy on growth. What was the council's legal opinion? Because this plan is at risk of legal challenge both before and after it is adopted. How many of your constituents have asked for more building work on the Wick? Why are the housing trends for Colchester at 1,207 so much higher than Braintree at 507 and Chelmsford 429, who have similar populations? I'm being told it is because Colchester Borough Council opted for a high growth strategy and the other two districts opted for a low growth strategy. Is that true? Let's find out the truth before approving this plan. This site is ecologically as important as the Castle Park, Highwoods and Abbey Field, for example. If you would not be prepared to vote for 1,000 homes on those sites today, you should not be voting for 1,000 homes on Middlewick.
Thank you. We'll respond to your points in bulk at the end. Thank you. So the next speaker is Grace Dark, please. So you've got 3 minutes and a bell will go at 2.
Good evening, councillors. What a predicament our council has placed you in. Let's be completely honest, the Middlewick Ranges should never have been put into the local plan. Added in 2016, rushed through at the last minute, inaccurate ecological surveys that did not reflect the true value of the site, with some councillors stating that the decision was forced upon them and that they were misled. But we are where we are. Only a court can now decide how fair and legal the plan is, unless you decide to not at this moment in time adopt this local plan and instead investigate an alternative local plan that doesn't include the Middlewick. You do not have to adopt this local plan until the end of 2023. Delaying the decision also gives central government the time to review its planning policy and Natural England enough time to award the site its true national status. You do have a choice, and this choice does not need to be made today. For this reason I urge councillors to request a delay in this decision. We've come a long way in 6 years, with life-altering reports from the IPCC on the climate crisis and the consequences of inaction. Don't underestimate the power you have to make a difference at a local level. It's very clear the science is stacking up against this decision, so now the decision has become a moral one. Yes, Colchester Borough Council are indeed between a rock and a hard place. To save an ecologically vital wildlife site or risk millions of pounds, time, higher housing targets and speculative development. A small price to pay for the huge mistake that was made, including the site, and for what will happen if the site is lost. You may be aware, in nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life, our lives. It is only right that you correct the wrong that Colchester Borough Council have caused. This is rare acid grassland, it cannot be replaced. Destroying this habitat is ecological and human suicide. Public and environment can't keep coming last, not when we know the effects this is having on everyone. I appreciate it must be difficult to meet housing targets handed down by a government, but recent comments by Michael Gove suggest changes are coming, saying it's no success to hit targets if housing is in the wrong place, doesn't have the infrastructure and doesn't contribute to beautiful communities. Natural England have also contacted Colchester Borough Council very recently with new evidence and have urged the council to rethink its inclusion in the local plan. Have all councillors seen this correspondence? If you aren't aware of this new evidence and you are having doubts because you don't feel that enough evidence is at hand to make this huge decision, then I urge you to delay. Please be aware information relayed to you by officers does not alert you to the legal issues raised if you do make the decision to adopt Section 2. The plan will very likely be subject to legal challenge. So the question is, are you prepared to stand up to officers, not vote in favour and put people and planet first? I leave you today with one final quote from Henry Thoreau. What is the use of a house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. We'll respond at the end with a summing up. Next speaker is Lisa Cross, please. Thank you. You have 3 minutes and a bell will go at 2. If you can just turn the mic on, please.
Thank you. I did. Yeah, okay. Colchester Borough councillors, I hear your concerns. I've heard your concerns on media. I understand the restraints that you are under. I've had many conversations. However, I feel that in exceptional circumstances, of which a climate emergency is one, you have declared a climate emergency. You are people placed in positions of responsibility, and you should stand up against the status quo and do what is morally and ethically right, not what is easiest. If we and the thousands of other residents felt that we could trust this council to protect the thousands of lives on this ecologically important habitat and to safeguard local residents in their physical and mental health, we would not be challenging your decisions. This council's record has been somewhat shaky on this matter. It's undermined public confidence hugely through its hasty, misinformed decisions. And these are the recorded words of a Colchester Borough councillor. Expert opinion and legal standpoints have also been systematically ignored, not only by yourselves, but by the planning inspector. We find it morally repugnant that councillors in other wards are able to throw such an important site under the bus to preserve their own seats, even where potential development could go on sites of less importance. It is also repugnant that a senior planner has been put forward for accolades when they have driven forward an ecocidal plan to build houses against all expert advice. Nothing personal. Future generations in Colchester are watching closely and will judge Colchester Borough Council's decisions accordingly. The MOD are under scrutiny too, please be advised, and will not be able to proceed with any development without challenge. This site is that important. To reiterate, if we felt this council was a trustworthy ally in the fight against biodiversity loss and climate collapse, we would be supporting you instead of fighting you. We feel that the way forward is for the council and its residents to come together and fight overdevelopment, congestion, air pollution, and to try and build a proper, resilient Colchester for the future, not one that kowtows, excuse me, to government pressure. I've actually got more time, but I've run out of things to say. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, and we'll feedback at the end. Next speaker is Sir Bob Russell, please.
Chairman, I wish to associate myself with all the comments that have been made so far. They say it all. Let's get the party politics out first. All political parties are in the dock over this. It's a Conservative government inexplicably wanting to shut a firing range in a garrison town. Unbelievable. But the extraordinary meeting the Borough Council held on the 1st of February last year saw every Labour councillor vote for the draft local plan, which included Middleweight, and all but one Liberal Democrat councillor likewise. So all three political parties are partly to blame or collectively to blame. Now, 99% of wildflower meadows in Essex have been lost since 1945, and it's inexplicable that Colchester Borough Council wants to build 1,000 houses on this unique area of open space. And this committee has an opportunity to stop it. You can stand up to officers in the same way as councillors stood up to officers 46 years ago, and the result is the Highwoods Country Park. If councillors back then could do it, so can you. I've consulted one of the country's most experienced and longest serving planning practitioners, now in his 6th decade, and based on his more than 50 years of deep knowledge of the planning system, his advice, kindly given pro bono and without prejudice, is that inclusion of Middleweight in the local plan is not straightforward, primarily, but not exclusively, to whether the strict conditions placed by the planning inspector in terms of diversity gain can be achieved, at least not for some years. He also points to the lack of a master plan for developing Middleweight. For time reasons, I can only quote part of what he's told me, and this is it. The inspectors have ruled Middleweight to be fit and sound for building, subject to a series of checks and balances found in the modified policies. The policies, however, do not constitute a master plan for the development, and one could argue the need for a master plan ahead of adoption. There's a lot more, but I realise the clock is against me. But this paragraph is critical. The modified local plan is required to identify 14,700 dwellings, but in fact identifies 15,970. There is therefore already a built-in contingency of 1,250. Delete Middleweight, and you've still got 250 dwellings spare in the system. Mr. Chairman, committee, please do tonight what councillors did all those years ago. Let's have in South Colchester the equivalent of Highwoods Country Park. You know it makes sense. You can do it. Stand up to the officers. Take back control.
Next speaker is Mr. Nick Chilvers, please.
Good evening. I'm not going to go over the same ground as others or repeat what I've said in here before. I've been here before. But the environmental and transport impact on the southeast will be huge if the Wick is included in the plan. I've listened in the past to the legal and procedural reasons for why we are where we are today. But panel members have never expressed any sympathy for an area that's about to be dumped on. They clearly didn't sign up to the tact and diplomacy course. Nor have I heard that you'll strive hard to mitigate the negative consequences. And the notion of a country park nearby seems to be no more than a smoke screen. So yes, emotions are running high. I urge you not to include the Wick in the plan. But if it is, I'll put this marker down. Inspectors have expressly said that a master plan must be put in place before an application is considered, and that the local authority and the MOD should engage with relevant parties and the local community. And the word residents is used in MM35. We will hold you to that. There are local experts in various fields, people who know what they're talking about. They should be listened to, work with them, not bypass them for consultants paid for by the MOD or developers. If you want a constructive collaboration, the council must be open, approachable, and not do deals behind closed doors. You will need to appoint dedicated officers to steer it, ones that can stand up to bullying tactics of major national developers. Highways have been totally complacent, we need challenging at every point, and you must fight for a country park. Remember, South East doesn't have a community council like My Land or Stanway to back for it. This plan has to work for both new and existing residents, especially working families with young children at school age. Without serious infrastructure, the sustainable transport card is being played hard. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. They'll be totally impractical for most. The families on Middleweight will not react well to being told to get across town to work or access services on a bike or a bus. It is tripe, rubbish. You'll get short shrift, a two-word response if you suggested that. Travel plans, they'll go in the bin. You can't insist on bus services. In fact, they've just been reduced. Bus companies are a law unto themselves. We will be watching. I suspect, because of weakness, the plan will be adopted. Extra pollution, congestion, social problems that follow will be your fault. So planners must ensure that mitigation measures set out by the inspector are followed to the letter. Because at the moment, there's a trust problem. I'll come back to this as things move forward, but tonight, just say no. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is John Acker, please.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Councillors, Local Planning Committee. Thank you very much for the ability to speak tonight. I come on behalf of West Mersey Council. We decided last week, after very careful consideration, that we would inform the Local Planning Committee that we would support adoption of Section 2. I think in many ways this was done with a very, very heavy heart. Certainly speaking as one personally who's been here on many occasions, brought coaches from Mersey right from the early stage. I never ever thought that this would be in a position that I would face tonight. But it is done out of very great care for our community, and I believe many rural villages covered by the local plan. It is because we, like many areas, will have the threat of speculative development hanging very, very strongly over us if this local plan is not adopted. I speak having sat through 9 days of an appeal recently, which I may say tonight was very professionally handled by the planning officers of the authority. And this was an intense application which was handled and the amount of attention that was given to it was very detailed. And I fear that certainly on Mersey and other rural hamlets, without the protection, and I have to say there can be no delay on this because a key aspect of many developers think is saying, well, you haven't got a local plan, we can go ahead with it. I say very clearly tonight, and I do listen to the voices from Middleweight very, very carefully, that we are, as an authority, under great threat from speculative development. And can I highlight another threat? This government, because this government is at sea on its planning policy. It doesn't know what way to turn. Every week seems to be a different turn that comes about. But make no mistake, if they don't get the housing allocation they will want, they will take over the responsibility directly from the local authority. So if there is any delay here, watch this space, whatever the local member of parliament says. And the third element of what I would say tonight is our neighbourhood plan. Like many authorities or councils, we've put a lot of energy into our local plan. If this local plan goes down the pan, we will effectively have no local plan. And that is another degree to our protection. So great regret that I have to speak in this way tonight, but it is very clear from West Mersey specifically, and I believe others, that we support the local plan tonight. Thank you very much for listening to what I said. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final speaker is William Jolly, please.
Good evening, everybody. Well, here we go. On the 26th of May, I received a letter from Karen Syrett, Officer for Planning, Colchester Borough Council. She stated the inspector's final report. The report sets out a number of modifications, and now the local plan section 2 is sound, legally compliant and capable of adoption. Karen Syrett now says council will need to consider inspector's report and then at a full council meeting for a final decision in due course. But as Karen Syrett had said at an earlier meeting, we understand locally nobody wants any more large developments, but we have to agree to the allotted plan. Well, Karen, this latest letter states the opposite. The full borough council in their authority have the final word. We cannot agree to any house on Middlewick. They then can tell that inspectorate from Bristol, although we signed up to the local plan 5 years ago, we can no longer agree to it. So our answer has to be a sound no. So Middlewick remains a tranquil, natural, open space, nature as it is in the heart of Colchester's Old Heath. Now, have any of you councillors been along Abbots Road lately? Because Middlewick looks glorious, and it will be a crime against the environment if building would be committed, and if you would allow just one house on there. I know loads of people, I know them very well, that use our Middlewick for long walks to clear their minds, feel the fresh air. Lots have no gardens. The Castle Park, the recreation ground, the Abbey Fields are okay, but nothing compares to Middlewick. It's a large open space. And what about the traffic? The junction at Old Heath Road, Abbots Road can't cope now. Has Essex Highways seriously looked into this? They want to see it at school leaving times. It's chaotic. The road is too narrow at the crossing to the small junction on Old Heath. Councillors, just do your duty to us, the electorate, say a final no to this monstrous so-called local plan. There's nothing local in it because these inspectorates are not local and they are based in Bristol. So I, William, expect in a week or two you've seen common sense and our Middlewick remains, as it always has been, glorious in the heart of Colchester. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And final speaker is going to be Mr. Alan Short, who is taking the place of Simon Collis. So if you'd like to take your place, and you've got up to 3 minutes.
Alan Short. The council had the ability to attempt to stop the WIC being used for private development when the Conservative group proposed that it became a nature park. I was quite surprised, having been out with local councillors collecting signatures to oppose any building on the Wick, when that was rejected by the majority in the council. It was then explained to me that the master plan was that we would build 1,000 houses on the Wick, and that would save a significant part of the Wick from future development. That this would be really, the answer to at least keeping some of it. Unfortunately, this issue is a bit like pregnancy. You can't be a bit pregnant. As soon as you start building houses on that place, then we will have lost the battle to stop them building more and more as time passes. We've seen on the inspector's report a set of conditions that have to be met. And believe me, those conditions will be met, at least in paper terms, in the tick box exercise, if not in real terms, so that the Ministry of Defence and the planning officers will end up with 1,000 houses in the Wick, and then we will have lost the argument. We will not be able to spend any more, stop the building of any more houses at that point in time. So what we need to do now is to do the right thing, and the right thing is to have the fight now. Say we are not going to build anything on the Wick. We're going to turn it into a proper country park for the benefit of the whole community. And we don't have to build those houses because we're a long way, we're 1,200 over the development. And we have plans to build more homes in the centre of Colchester, which in my view is a good thing, that will meet any shortfall because of withdrawal elsewhere. So do the right thing and stop the Wick now by turning those sections of the local plan down. Thank you.
Thank you. What we're going to do now is officers will feedback on all the points raised by our 10 speakers, and then we will move on to councillors after that. So Karen, if you'd like to start the response, and then any other officers that we need to call to respond.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm not going to repeat answers that several people raised, so I'll respond to each point raised just for once, but it doesn't mean it's not been heard more than once. Mr. Martin referred to a number of other sites being removed or reduced in number to accommodate Middleweight. This was very much an evidence-based exercise. Bullock Wood, for example, was part of the broad area of search for the garden community at the time. It would have been premature to include it. Other sites, such as the reductions we saw on Mersey, were very much based on evidence. And that's why Middleweight too was reduced from 2,000 new homes to 1,000. And I'll come on later to why it's important to have the local plan to ensure that remains at that figure. Mr. Kilshaw referred predominantly to ecological evidence, and this evidence was considered appropriate by an independent examiner, inspector. The MOD ecology report was also prepared in accordance with a methodology which was agreed by ECOS. For those of you who aren't aware, ECOS are the commercial arm of Essex Wildlife Trust. They agreed the methodology for that report. Building on compensatory land, this hasn't been ruled out. The master plan, and we are required to prepare a master plan, and funding has been set aside to do just that. The master plan will identify the most appropriate area for built development, and 60% of the site will remain as open space. Andrew Wilkinson referred first of all to the council's 5-year housing land supply. And I'll apologise in advance, Mr. Wilkinson, but you fitted in an awful lot in your 3 minutes, and I think I missed some of it, but I will try and cover as many points as I can. First of all, the council does have a housing land supply adequate for the next 5 years. We don't have a plentiful 5-year housing land supply, and it is a rolling target. So we will shortly be publishing the next supply for the 5-year period from 2022 to 2027. I don't expect there to be a large surplus. Next year, we'll need an extra 920 homes plus a buffer of 5% to meet the government's target. So that assumes we're approving more houses in that period. The new figure at present that we would be obliged to use for that annual target is approximately 1,060, slightly more, I think, than Mr. Wilkinson said. But there are more recent projections that suggest it should be a figure that's higher than that. In the past, evidence has suggested that figure should be as high as 1,161. And the government's own standard methodology suggests a higher figure as well. The new local plan will take much longer to prepare than 19 months. And I would really like to see how anyone achieved it in 7 months, because there are various statutory stages to comply with. We prepared a master plan for, a development plan document for a single site in Tiptree, and it took longer than that. And that was with everyone on board. This process for us includes call for sites, renewed evidence, because our evidence base dates back to 2016 and 2017 in some instances, several rounds of public consultations and revisions to plans, and more difficult decisions to be made at committees like this. The difficult decisions won't go away regardless of which sites are included. I'm not familiar with the high and low growth strategy that Mr. Wilkinson spoke about, particularly in terms of Chelmsford and Braintree, because both those authorities are within the same housing market area as us, and we conducted joint evidence base on the subject. I also believe that Chelmsford's target is significantly higher than Mr. Wilkinson said. Turning to Grace Stark, who suggested that Middleweight was rushed through. Well, I would have to disagree with that. Middleweight has been the subject of much evidence-based work to inform its inclusion in the plan. It did get submitted later on in the process, but it wasn't too late. It could have been submitted much later, in fact. And then we wouldn't have had the opportunity to prepare evidence to inform the decision. Michael Gove's statement on planning. Well, I think all political parties have made numerous statements which actually don't often translate into legislation or changes to regulations. And I would have to question how the government's commitment to build 300,000 new homes a year are going to go if they only go in places where people want them. I've never known a site that everyone wants development on. What the local plan does do, however, it helps determine how any site is developed, and that offers control. Lisa Cross, don't take it personally, but I'm only doing my job and I haven't got anything further to say to your comments. Sir Bob, like Highwoods, the policy covering Middlewick requires a master plan, and there will be a lot of open space. In fact, approximately 60% open space. Possibly the same experienced planner that Sir Bob referred to, of 6 decades experience, also wrote a letter into the Gazette recently. And if it is the same gentleman, he said that it was wrong not to adopt the plan. It offers protection. The housing target is a rolling target, and we continually have to provide sites to deliver housing on. Nick Chilvers, I listened to you, Nick, at Cabinet last week, and you made some really sensible suggestions about engagement, not simply using online surveys, and about how you felt if this had to go ahead, it should link into development and wider improvements in South East Colchester. I thought all this was really useful comments to make, and we will certainly look to work with you and others to address some of these points if we get to the master plan stage. Mr. Acker, like you, some time ago, I didn't think we would be arguing the same case, but we found it on more than one occasion recently. I heard the point about neighbourhood plans, and I also agree with the points you made about speculative development and government intervention. They aren't, you know, something that isn't going to come true. They will come true. Mr. Jolliffe, I have to disagree with you about your interpretation of what I said at a previous meeting. What I said is what I've just said in response to a previous comment. No one wants development anywhere near them, and that's a fact. And hard as it might be to accept this, but the best way to protect that open space and to retain it as public space is to have some development, which will fund it and prevent it being fenced off. The inspector has looked at transport agreements, has looked at the transport work that was undertaken to inform this allocation, and he has agreed that it is acceptable. And Mr. Short, the local plan, in my opinion, is the best way to ensure that no more than 1,000 homes are built on that site. Thank you.
Thank you for the summing up. We will now move. No, sorry, I'm sorry, please. Sorry, if we're going to carry on the meeting, we do actually need to crack on and get the other speakers to make their points, please. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to read the statement from Will Quince MP.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a statement to the Local Plan Committee on Middlewick. Thank you for allowing me to have a statement read out at your meeting this evening. I would like to address my comments to the future of Middlewick Ranges. I believe it to be important to highlight that I have been consistently outspoken in my opposition to the proposed development and inclusion of the WIC in the local plan. I have supported residents and community groups and remain in full support of their ongoing opposition to build houses and have worked to persuade the Ministry of Defence to abandon plans to sell the WIC. I understand the need for housing, particularly affordable and for social rent, but it is clear to me that Colchester Borough Council did not need to allocate 1,000 homes on Middlewick Ranges in the local plan and have consistently strongly argued against this. I refer the committee to my previous submissions in opposition to the inclusion of Middlewick in the local plan and my submissions to the planning inspector, again setting out my opposition. The grounds for removing Middlewick from the local plan are numerous and compelling. Most recently, I met with the Minister for Defence Procurement, Jeremy Quinn, in March to outline my continued opposition to the sale. However, the frustrating reality is the MOD will not simply withdraw the site from its disposal list, especially as Colchester Borough Council included Middlewick in the local plan and allocated it for 1,000 homes, a decision which went against the wishes of local residents and was completely unnecessary, especially given the lateness of the application by the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. In particular, I have raised concerns about the rare lowland acid grassland, which would be lost if the sale and development were to go ahead. On that basis, viability for development must be questioned. A stipulation made to the local plan meant a management company would need to be set up to look at the creation of acid grassland in another area in mitigation for up to 30 years. I impressed on the Minister the considerable risk this poses to the MOD, given such a recreation of rare acid grassland on site has never been done and is only possible in theory. The MOD would, as a result, have a 30-year liability based upon an unproven concept. The above is a compelling reason alone, but one of many. Again, I refer the committee to my previous submissions in opposition to the inclusion of Middlewick in the local plan. Building on the Wick is not something I or my constituents ever wanted to see. This committee has the chance to right this wrong and stand with local residents. Middlewick should never have been included in the local plan, and tonight you can change this. I urge you to be bold and do the right thing. Will Quince, Member of Parliament for Colchester. Thank you, Chair.
Next speaker is Councillor Mark Gocher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say to the committee that I don't envy the position you're in tonight. You have a very difficult decision to make. And to any new members of the committee, I just want to say that this is not your fault that we're in this situation. But I do want this to go on record. I'm saying this next thing. Middlewick Ranges should never have been put in the draft local plan in the first place. The reason for this is because I think most people in this room would know that the best solution to this would be for the MOD to remove the wick from the sale. That's the ideal solution. But of course, why will they? If the council has signalled to them that they're happy for 1,000 houses to go on the site. Why would they withdraw the sale if they've been offered an open door? That's my problem. Now I know the arguments about the 2,000 figure that they wanted to sell the wick for in the first place. But like Alan Short said earlier, very well put, I don't believe that it will stay at 1,000 houses because I've seen what's happened to similar sites in the Midlands, in Leicestershire and so forth, where it starts with one figure, goes through one local plan, then it gets whittled away in subsequent decades. And I would like to know from the panel and from the officers, what absolute guarantee have you got that it would stay at 1,000 and wouldn't then whittle higher? That's my first question. Second question, I've heard a lot of talk about how long it would take to rewrite the local plan if it is rejected in order to remove Middlewick. I know there's no mechanism for just taking Middlewick out on its own. You have to reject the plan, rewrite parts of it. But surely it is only one part of the plan that needs rewriting, not the whole thing. Most of it would stay and just one part would be rewritten. So if it's been done in 7 months elsewhere, why can't it be done in 7 months here? It's not the whole plan that's being rewritten, it's one part, a relatively small part when you take into account the whole local plan. I would also like to know exactly what ecological guarantees that we have for how such a huge development as this would be mitigated against. I'm afraid I have no confidence in the MOD's ecological surveys, not when one of their so-called ecologists told me at the consultation that you can move badger sets, which anyone with a simplistic knowledge of ecology would know is not possible. So what are your ecological mitigation plans, given the huge amount of ecocide that will be done in the area that is built on? My own view is, having listened to what's been said tonight, that if it is possible to rewrite this plan in a short space of time to meet the target of 2023, when we have to have a local plan in place, we should do it. Now, you obviously you will answer me whether that is possible, but we should do that. We should take the wick out and do so. But obviously, I realise the difficulty of the decision you've got when you have to take into account the risk of speculative development. And I'm not glossing over that. But in terms of the area, I was there on Sunday morning. It was well used by members of the public. It is surrounded by urban areas. It is the largest open bit of countryside in southern Colchester. It is well used by the residents. Urbanising that would basically be taking away their right, and I would say it is a right, to a bit of countryside and a bit of nature on their doorstep. And the traffic on that bit of Mersey Road near Abbots Road was appalling, and it was a Sunday morning. And now I've sat in planning meetings where there's been tiny developments of 2 or 3 houses, and people have been kind of wrestling with their consciences over adding to traffic. How much traffic do you think this is going to add to Mersey Road and those sorts of areas? Mersey Road, the bottom bit, that's near the roundabout, is the most polluted road in Colchester. So what have you done to consider the traffic implications of such a huge development? What about the climate emergency? Has the climate emergency permeated all of your thinking on the local plan? We declared one in 2019. I'll just leave you with one thought, and it's from that well-known songwriter, Joni Mitchell. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Thank you.
Next speaker is Councillor David King, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark Gocher, for leaving the speaker on. As leader of the council, I've been asked and challenged, what's your personal position? And I have a responsibility for the strategic perspective that we as a local authority should take. We as councillors, you tonight, and full council when we get to it, if we do, the kind of judgment we'll have to make. I'm not a planning expert. We do have some, I'm pleased to say. And therefore, in that sense, don't want to repeat all the things that have been said by them, but I will offer you a personal take. And part of it is, and I thank the speakers, I've listened to the passion, the knowledge, and the focus on one part of the whole. And that's my issue, that this is a big picture that fits with how many relationships are managed, how the whole of the borough and all the many pressures on it for infrastructure and for house building and for development and the need to live and the need to have good open space, how all of that is managed. And so I really sort of start with, what's my view on the right thing? Given where we are, the right thing, or turn it the other way around, the wrong thing would be not to adopt the local plan. And it's because the right thing to do is to take a sensible view of the quality of advice that's given to us. I accept the advice about the time it takes, because we've seen it in this local authority and we've seen it elsewhere, to revise, restart, and have another crack at a local plan because of the understandable passions about one part of the whole. Now, I'm troubled by the prospect of building on Middleweight. Who wouldn't be? I'm troubled at the lack of trust that I've heard tonight, and actually who wouldn't be? I'm troubled also by the fact that we've made this, again, as ever, a little bit personal. Karen Sire is an admirable public servant, and she works with a passion of her own to give the very best, the most independent advice that's possible. The respect that her peers give to her is because on the facts that are available, on the experience of many in our country as well as locally, on the evidence that's available, our choices are limited and they bring us to this place. I accept that people may not want to accept that, completely get it. And I accept that people disagree, isn't that the nature of democracy and life? But, you know, my right thing is for us to press ahead, and however much we may have to swallow hard about the many issues that come with development, given where we are, to proceed is better than all that follows if we don't. Now, we've heard it, and let's say it again very briefly. We will get higher housing targets. How does that help anybody? We will get, therefore, more pressure on our infrastructure. How does that help anybody? We will have the developers in the space between our rejection and whatever may follow, perhaps an insistence by government or the county council, for those who look at the rule set, in that space, speculative development. That speculative development is not in our interest. Higher housing targets are not in our interest. One of the speakers tonight said, you're in a rock, between a rock and a hard place. Yes, we are. And in that rock and a hard place situation, feeling the squeeze, what we can fall back on is our sense of duty to the whole of the borough. Well expressed by Mr. John Acker earlier. There are many communities who worry now of what has happened and worry more if we walk away from where we've got and the recommendations that we have in front of us. One last thing, and again, going back to the conversations and the points made earlier, residents are entitled to assurance. Residents who use Middleweight as a highly prized bit of community space, whether it's because you're interested in its many acidic grassland benefits or otherwise, or just as a place to go and enjoy space, we have to work at getting that 60% kept. We have to work at Country Park. We have to work at preservation. We have to work at the quality of design. There are some reasons to think that a local plan will help us do that. So I just want to end on that, Chair, with the fact that there is an emotional debate that we as a council, as a local authority, and I as its leader, will want to do everything we can to respond to it. But we have a duty tonight. You have that challenge. And my view is clear. I have to put myself on the side of that big picture. And there is a hook to this as well, which is we have a very good reputation as a local authority. And although many in this room may not see it, may not want to hear it, or it's not the moment to talk about it, it matters in lots of different ways. Our ability to be heard in government, in the county council as well, our ability to make things happen, our ability to spend resources and time on things that matter, like the cost of living crisis and much else, they all are part of the whole. To walk away from a local plan is a sign of dysfunctionality. And I have to say, we're not just pay a monetary price for that. We don't just pay a price in terms of house build and target and all the rest described. We'll pay a subtle price and we'll be taken a little bit less seriously. We'll have less influence when it might matter. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Next speaker. The next speaker, please, is Councillor Scordis. Councillor Scordis, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee. What I sadly say might be quite a long evening for you. I think, kind of to echo Councillor Gocher, I think this committee faces a very difficult and important decision. And for many councillors, it's your first committee since being elected. So quite a lot to see. And it's certainly not responsibility I envy as a sitting councillor. I have no doubt you will all be asking probing questions about this important decision laid on your shoulders tonight. It's a choice of adopting a local plan that will decide on our future growth and secure protection for parts of the town, but at the same time, building on an unpopular site like Middlewick, or risking huge speculative development across the town, which could even include more homes on sites like Middlewick, Mersey, Great Tay, and other plots of land that developers have had their eye on over the years. It's fair to say it really is a catch-22 for the town and for Middlewick, and I think it's important that residents do understand that this isn't an easy shut case decision. My biggest concern is, and always has been, Middlewick Ranges in my own ward. Some could call me a NIMBY because it's my own ward, but I have to represent my residents. Like others, I do believe that Middlewick Ranges never should have been included in the local plan for all the comments stated, and I've come to speak out about it regularly. Some of you probably bored to see me again. But I do respect committee members at the time who had a tough decision presented towards you, and I can agree to disagree. And we have to focus on where we are today with the challenges we face. For my residents, it's their only main area of green space. It's probably one of the most unique green spaces in Colchester. There's not really anywhere else like it. And if you haven't visited it, please do, whether you go for a dog walk, a run, or just a walk. I want to put on record, though, how disappointed I am in the MOD for putting us in this situation as a town. We've said it for years. It really is disgraceful for what we've done for the MOD in the town. Developments on Abbeyfield, we haven't complained, we've got on with it. There's still issues with the play park, as we know, but we've worked well, and this is really disappointing. And I want to also add how disgraceful it is that a government planning inspector has approved this site for building after all the evidence put forward by residents, councillors, and other local groups. For me, it shows how broken our planning system is and what we have to work with as a borough, which is why we are put in this difficult situation. And it really shows that the government doesn't take the climate emergency, doesn't treat it as an emergency. And isn't it convenient? A government inspector agreed with the own ecological report of one of its own departments. Isn't that quite convenient? So others have talked passionately about the site, and I don't really want to echo that because I think a lot of you understand that, and you've all had emails from a lot of local residents. But I am seeking some clarity on some questions, and I don't mind if they come after other councillors, Councillor Goss. What I'd like to know is, firstly, if the local plan is adopted, what evaluations still need to be undertaken on the site, such as archaeological studies? Will the council look to commission its own biodiversity study rather than rely on the shaky study we've had from the MOD, who are obviously desperate to sell their own land? After all, we know that badgers, starlings, all protected on here, so we do have to take that in consideration. And we talked about a country park or nature reserve. Would we be able to look at something similar to Highwoods, but have it run by the council, not by a private management company, not by a developer, by the council, so it's protected for generations? It would probably mean housing, because Highwoods had to have the housing to have the country park, but would we, if worst comes to worst, be able to do damage limitation and protect as much of that land for future generations, as much wildlife as we can? I will leave, and the other question as well, sorry, is will we as a council be able to challenge Essex Highways study regarding infrastructure? Their own study assumes that people will take the bus, but as Mr. Chilvers has rightly pointed out, lots of our buses have been cut, so there are fewer buses to get. So that has been an issue, and we've seen from recent developments, such as the Rowhedge Wharf development, we were promised a bus service, it's still not forthcoming. So they're the questions I'd like to be asked, but I'm happy to wait after the other councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Scudis. They will all be summed up at the end. And then the final councillor we've got is Councillor Adam Fox, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee as well. I've come to speak as a local ward councillor who walks the Wick, and enjoys it as a local open space. And as others have said at this time of year in particular, it really does shine. I'd like to start by putting something straight though. So we heard a statement read from our local MP who says, do the right thing. But I think that was a very well crafted statement. He doesn't actually say what the right thing is. Unfortunately, I fear that is because he is playing politics. He cannot tell you to vote against the local plan because it is against Conservative government policy not to have a local plan. And they want every council to have a local plan in place by the end of 2023. Last year, while I was on this committee, and we invited Will Quince to attend and speak with the committee. He didn't attend and he's not here tonight. The Ministry of Defence is a government department. This is a decision by the government to develop Middlewick. Last year, the government promised, last year, in fact, the Prime Minister promised no more development on green fields. But like many statements from the Prime Minister, it doesn't actually appear he will do that. The MOD is selling off land all over the country to fill a black hole in defence budgets, while the world is a more dangerous place. I'd also like to address some of the comments from Sir Bob Russell, and I don't think I could let this pass as leader of the Labour group on the council. The vote in February 2021 took place on section 1 of the local plan. It was on the strategic issues. That document doesn't mention Middlewick once. It's the second time Sir Bob Russell has made this false assertion about Labour councillors, and he picked out Labour councillors in particular. As a former Member of Parliament and the High Steward of Colchester, I know he recognises the responsibility, and we all have to uphold standards in public life. I'm sure his mistake is inadvertent, but I would ask him at some stage to correct the record on that. As local councillors, we've worked with our local community to put pressure on the landowner, the Ministry of Defence, to stop the sale and to stop the build, to take it off the table. It is they who could make the ultimate decision to stop the development. And we've been to Westminster, we've asked residents to write, we've put together petitions in order to put directly to the people who could stop this, our voices. Local councillors and residents made representations to the local plan committee, the inspector, and arguments about retaining green space at Middlewick are compelling. I recognise that members of the local plan committee this evening have a difficult decision to make, particularly for those who are new to this process. They face the prospect of including Middlewick against local objections for 1,000 houses or voting against the local plan as a whole, which could result in speculative development. That could result in even more houses on green spaces, including the original 2,000 or more that the MOD first wanted. The local plan also contains allocations and protections for a whole range of sites across the borough. In Mersey and Tiptree, I know many of these will be important to members of the committee, and there will be sites in your own areas that you don't want to develop either. Some may be in the local plan, some may not be allocated in the local plan. The plan also contains policies on affordable housing that would enable us to build a genuinely affordable housing that we really need. As a former portfolio holder for housing, I know how important that is. And without a local plan, we wouldn't be able to develop supplementary planning documents on climate change and sustainability that really would help us in the future. If we are to follow the model of Highwoods, where the houses were built but a country park was developed, then can we look at future designations of Middlewick as a local green space, country park or nature reserve? And what can we do about reviewing the infrastructure deficit that we hear so much about from local residents, whether that be on transport, including bus services, or whether it be on local green spaces or health facilities or schools? I know local councillors will continue to fight development at Middlewick, as local councils often do when they don't meet the needs of local residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's all speakers having completed their speeches, and I'll now refer back to officers to respond to all points made by councillors, please.
Thank you. Turning first to the issue of the number of dwellings. There's never a guarantee about how many dwellings there'll be on a site, but the best way to protect that figure is to have a local plan and to have a policy which restricts the figure. The policy also requires much more mitigation, as several of the speakers so far tonight have mentioned it. Without a local plan, a planning application could come in for any number of dwellings, and that would come in without a master plan and without the evidence that's just been spoken about. The local plan doesn't only, if we were to review the local plan, it wouldn't just be one part. It's not as simple as removing Middlewick and putting in something else. It really is a case of rewriting it. At this stage, some of the evidence base is 6 years old, some even more so. Think about how much retailing has changed in that time. We'd have to undertake work on that. And what about the other sites that people objected to? When Middlewick was in the local plan at one stage, we actually had more representations about Mersey and the sites there than we did about Middlewick. Traffic congestion has been addressed, and we are looking at sustainable modes as well as catering for car use. And I think that will hopefully address many of the concerns that Councillor Gocher would have, as well as helping to reduce congestion. The local plan timing, we heard mention of the average time being 19 months. Well, actually, this is only from publication to adoption. So that's only the end of the process. Before we get to that stage, I'll run through the stages we have to go through and just consider how long you think that might take in addition to that 19 months. We have to carry out a call for sites. So that's an opportunity for people to put sites forward that might be considered suitable for development. We have to consider every single one of those sites, and they go through a strict criteria-based assessment. I'll give you an example of one town or village, Tiptree. There were 65 sites in Tiptree alone. So that in itself is not a small piece of work. We then draft the initial plan, which is called Issues and Options, and we commission the early stages of evidence to inform that. We carry out a public consultation for a minimum of 6 weeks. We then consider all the representations we receive, and we seek to incorporate changes to the draft plan. We also carry out a sustainability appraisal and habitat regulations assessment. At the same time, we carry out more evidence-based work or finish some of that work which has to take place over a longer time period, such as some of the ecological surveys, which can only be taken at certain times of the year. We then consult, subject to committee approval, on a preferred options document, again for a minimum of 6 weeks. We then have to assess the representations made, which may be thousands. We might make amendments to the plan at that stage, and then finally we get to publish the plan, again, if the committee agrees to it. So it's quite a long period, which shouldn't be underestimated, before we get to that publication stage. Then at publication, we have further consultation and examination, consultation on modifications, and then hopefully adoption. National parks actually feature in the fastest adopted local plans, and that's probably because they don't have to plan for too much. The national parks are actually exempt from the presumption in favour of sustainable development. In terms of further studies required, the answer is basically yes to everything. There will be a lot more studies required before anything can happen on the Middlewick site. We could commission our own ecological work. That's something which is available to us. There obviously would be a cost associated with that. We could look at providing a country park or a nature reserve and for it to be managed by the council. We would have to look at all the implications of that, but it's certainly a possibility. And yes, we will be able to challenge for highway work. I think more detailed work will definitely be required as the scheme progresses, whether that be through the master plan or on to planning application stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other officers wishing to speak? Okay, thank you for the summing up. Councillor Barber, you indicated you wanted to speak, which is slightly unusual outside of the actual main item being taken through. Can it wait until the main item, or is it relevant at this stage?
No, it can wait to the main item.
Thank you. So, Sandra, if you'd actually like to take us through item 7, which is the substantive item on this committee meeting tonight. I would also remind you we have 3 other items after this, so obviously this is going to take substantial time, and quite rightly so. And then we've got items 8, 9 and 10, 2 of them around neighbourhood plans, and then a national update on levelling up. So just to remind you that we do have 3 other items post item 7. But over to you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. The Colchester Section 2 local plan was submitted to government in October 2017 alongside the Section 1 part of the plan, which was adopted in February 2021. As the Section 1 strategic local plan shared with Braintree and tendering district councils covered the strategic matters, including setting the housing and employment requirements, as well as confirming the broad area for the tendering Colchester Borders Garden Community, all other borough-wide site allocations and policies, including a comprehensive framework for development management, sits within the Colchester Section 2 local plan. The Section 2 plan underwent virtual examination hearings in April 2021, following which we consulted on the inspector's main modifications, which were considered to be necessary to make the plan sound in November 2021. All of the comments and representations received to that consultation have been considered by the inspectors, along with all of the evidence heard and submitted throughout the process, including at the examination. The inspector's final report has now been issued and published. This confirms that the plan is sound, legally compliant if all of the final main modifications are incorporated into the plan. The full report is appended to this item along with the final schedule of main modifications. Very limited further amendments have been made to the modifications, which were advertised for consultation in October and November last year. The modifications which have been amended further are listed in the report at paragraph 5.7 and referred to where appropriate in the inspector's report. These all address matters for clarity and consistency and don't change the substance of the advertised main modifications or the plan. In response to comments received, some corrections and updates have been made to the policies maps, and these are listed in paragraph 5.8 of the report. The final draft of the Colchester Section 2 local plan, with all of the final main and additional minor modifications incorporated, is appended to the report as Appendix C and the final maps as Appendix D. The maps are currently grouped as A4 and A3 alphabetically. In the final version of the plan, these will be in plan order. The final draft of the local plan includes an updated introduction to reflect the separate adoption of Section 1. As referred to in paragraph 5.9 of the report, it includes suggested tributes for 2 individuals who are sadly no longer with us and who have had a significant influence on shaping and informing the content or process enriching the plan. Stephen Ashworth, planning law partner at Denton's, and our own Colchester Borough Council officer, Alistair Day, principal planning and specialist manager. The tributes are set out in full in the report, and it's hoped that members will support their inclusion in the introduction to the plan. Members are being asked to recommend the adoption of section 2 of the Colchester local plan with the final main modifications incorporated to full council for formal adoption. This, together with section 1 already adopted, would provide the council with an up-to-date borough-wide local plan and establish a robust position for making development management decisions. At this stage, no further amendments can be made to the content of the plan. We've heard a lot about Middleweight this evening, which we realise are the significant concern to the local residents. But it's important to remember the decision tonight is about the whole plan, not just about Middleweight. The importance of the council having an up-to-date local plan cannot be overstated. The existing policy framework, the current local plan, will become increasingly out of date, and which reduces the control and influence the council can have over planning decisions. It may also result in the council not being able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and could be subject to more speculative planning applications and the presumption in favour of development. Local planning authorities are required to have an up-to-date local plan in place by the end of 2023 or potentially face government sanction or intervention. And officers, as it's been said, do not believe it would be possible to meet this deadline if Section 2 plan was not adopted. As a final reminder, members are asked this evening to consider the recommendation which asks the committee to recommend the Section 2 local plan as modified to the council for formal adoption, and additionally to authorise the lead officer for planning and place strategy just to make minor corrections such as typos or similar minor factual corrections should they be required prior to publication and formal notification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra, for taking us through that at a high level. We've heard a lot of speakers this evening. We know what an important decision this committee has to make. Procedurally, this isn't the end of the journey tonight. If we decide as a committee to take on board 2.1 and 2.2, which is what this committee is being asked to look at and debate and decide on facts, not emotions, then that will go to full council at a meeting, I believe, in July, where all 51 councillors will have the chance to debate and decide whether they then adopt Section 2. So that we are not going to be finalising this tonight. What we will be doing is sending it through the process into full council. That is what will happen if we approve and adopt 2.1 and 2.2. There is nothing else on the table this evening as a decision. Those are the decisions we're being asked to make. We've had some very passionate speakers and we've allowed everyone to have their say. Emotions run high, and I get that. I've been there myself when the housing was being pushed onto Mile End over a decade ago. And I certainly remember coming to this committee, being part of this committee and also voicing those concerns on similar grounds. So I do understand how people feel when house building is going on in important parts of their community. So it doesn't go unheard, and it certainly is understood. What I would say is that we've listened and allowed everyone to have their say tonight. And I would respectfully ask that the audience allows councillors to debate. And if you don't agree with the points, please do not interrupt, because we do have important work to do. I've been quite generous tonight in not stopping people and allowing everyone to have their say. So please allow us to have our say on what is a really, really serious matter. And we will probe and we will ask those questions. And you can rest assured that all councillors will have read those reports, because I know they take it seriously. I can tell you that for a fact. So the first councillor that indicated is Councillor Barber. I haven't seen anybody else. If I've missed anybody, I apologise. Councillor Laws, as in Darius Laws, is second. So Councillor Barber, if you'd like to start and ask any pertinent questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, officers, for the report this evening, and thank you to everyone who's attended and spoke. as well as everyone who wrote to me over particularly over last week or so. I haven't actually responded to anyone via email who's written to me, largely because of the volume of people who've written to me, but also because I wanted to come into this meeting with as open a mind as possible, and I didn't want to prejudice my position. And I know we are allowed to make statements on this committee, unlike at the planning committee prior, but nonetheless, I think this is, I think actually, as Councillor Scaldis said, it's a very difficult decision to make. As Councillor Goss, the chairman, has just said, there is only two options on the table this evening. That is to vote for the plan to go to full council with a recommendation of approval, or vote to effectively throw out as section 2 of the local plan and the implications of that. Before I go on to set out my thinking and how I'm leaning towards voting this evening, I do have a few questions that just were picked up during the submissions from the public and councillors. Firstly, there was reference to a letter by Natural England. If you were able to just elaborate on that, whether that did come, and if not, where that suggestion may have come from, if you know, and what the contents were, if there is such a letter, that'd be very helpful. Thank you. I am very worried about the risk of speculative development, having had a shed load in my ward over since the last few years, starting, I remember, 2016 was the first major one I can recall in my ward, and that obviously is a major concern for myself about how that will play out across the borough. What was I going to ask? I do think, therefore, I just want to be clear on the implications of what happens if we vote against the plan in respect of what the actual steps are the morning after, the night before. What happens? Do we write to the Secretary of State to inform them that we are no longer pursuing section 2? Can we just go forward with section 1 and a revised section 2? What would be the actual steps that you would have to take the day after, tomorrow morning, if we made a decision tonight to reject the plan? I'd be interested in understanding a bit more around that. Councillor Fox referred to Sir Bob Russell withdrawing comments about previous votes. There was actually 2 meetings in February 2021, which Sir Bob Russell was referring to the budget meeting when I specifically proposed an amendment to the budget to include money to investigate a country park or nature reserve on Middlewick. The first meeting, which I think Councillor Fox thought Sir Bob was referring to, was in fact section 1 adoption, but later that month we had the budget meeting where Middlewick was on the agenda. So I don't think Sir Bob Russell has to withdraw any comments. He was correct. My leaning, do you know, actually, I'd say I think this is the first meeting since I first spoke in full council and Paul Smith hit me for 6 that I feel anxious speaking and making a decision in full council. In council, I don't really get nervous having been here for a few years, but I really do feel there's a very difficult decision to make this evening, so which is why I've given it a lot of thought. However, having listened to everyone and all the representations and the evidence put forward by officers, my gut feeling at the moment is that I'm going to vote against the plan. And the reason why I think that is because I have in front of me a document that which I know by the content in front of me will not work for Colchester. And I've always had deep reservations about the local plan and the steps we were taking towards it. And then the possibility of issues. So I've got certainty on one hand of what I view as negative and possibilities of negative and the chance for a review. My inclination, actually, going a few weeks ago, my preference was I thought we should adopt the plan and then review it pretty imminently. But my feeling is that if we include Middlewick in any way at this point, we will not take it out in any review. It will be in. And if we go in with an attitude of we're adopting and then reviewing, we will review and still have Middlewick. And I just don't believe that we would take it out in any subsequent review following adoption. On the speculative development side of things, I have confidence that we can defend against speculative development in the short term. And I'm also minded on the timing that there's planning reforms coming up. And because of those 2 factors, my concerns are slightly less than they perhaps would have been even a couple of years ago. I would also just say that we haven't got here by accident. I think there's sometimes put forward a sort of fait accompli where we've got to, we as an authority willingly put Middlewick in the plan. I was sat here 5 years ago, Councillor Goss is the only other member here, although I voted against submission of the local plan 5 years ago, pretty much to the day. I reckon the authority put it in. So it's not that we're here by accident. We've, as an authority, decided to put it in and gone forward with it. And I can only look at the planning side. There's comments about the MOD, which are perhaps fair enough, but ultimately we're looking at it from a planning perspective. And ultimately, I haven't gone through about all the landowners' intentions across the borough when we were examining sites. Ultimately, we're the planning authority. We're looking at the planning perspective, not the land ownership, although that does form part of the essay, but we're looking at it from a planning perspective. The MOD is treated like any other landowner for planning purposes. So we are here because of decisions we've made as an authority. I think on balance, I will be voting against the plan this evening. I want us to go in with a fresh approach with a particular focus on neighbour plans. And so unless I hear significant submissions otherwise, my vote is currently against this evening. But I would just be interested in understanding the mechanisms if we were to vote against section 2, what officers will have to do tomorrow effectively. But that's where my position is at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So points don't get lost. We'll take answers after each speaker. So I'll allow Karen and the team to respond to the points you've made, and then we'll go on to Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Kirby Taylor is the next one on my list.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned Natural England, because I jotted that down to answer and then skipped over it by mistake. We haven't received any such letter. If it's a new letter, they did comment as the local plan progressed, and we're just checking whether they commented on the modifications themselves. And we'll certainly find anything out. You know, we'll check with them if there is something more recent that we haven't received prior to full council, which leads nicely on to the next steps. Nothing happens tomorrow other than an alternative recommendation will be made to full council. If this council does not recommend the plan for adoption, the recommendation to full council will follow the decision taken here tonight. There will still be a vote at that meeting in July. If full council then decide not to adopt the plan, we will be required to formally withdraw the plan. And when you formally withdraw a plan, you formally withdraw all the evidence that underpins it. So that all disappears as well. We'll then have to start again along the lines that I outlined earlier. I would caution the planning reforms, because I think even the government have said it's likely to be 2024 before many of them come into being. It may be that some of the guidance can be introduced earlier, but I was involved in a consultation with the department today about one of the aspects of those reforms. So they're very much still looking at details. So I don't think that will be anytime soon. But I think they were your main questions there.
Okay, thank you for that response. Councillor Darius Laws, you're the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a substitute here tonight, first time on local plan, in fact. So I'm one of the junior members here in terms of experience. I share Councillor Barber's anxiety over the enormity of this decision that we have tonight, and then potentially at full council. I pay tribute to the incredible energy and work undertaken by our officers. They do an amazing job. I know they care about Colchester. I pay tribute to all of you guys this evening who've come here. I was particularly moved by, forgive me if I got your name wrong, sir, Richard Kilshaw. I was particularly moved by your words. I myself am more of a woodland man, but I hear you. I hear you, and I've done some additional reading tonight about rare acid grasslands on top of what I already had done. I still have gaps in that knowledge, but I understand how it is significantly well-established habitats that you can't easily replace. So thank you for enlightening the room. And for the benefit of planners and for developers listening and watching, I had a chat with my 4.5-year-old this evening before I came here. He wanted to know why I wouldn't be reading him a story, and I said that I needed to go and have a meeting in the town hall about housing. And I asked him if he had anything he wanted me to convey. And he had 3 very useful points, actually. He wants to know why there aren't more colourful houses in Colchester, because they all look the same, which I thought was good. He wants to know why there are so many stinky and noisy cars on the roads, which I completely agree with. And then finally, and Councillor Scord has touched on it earlier, he wants to know why children's play parks are not open. That particular situation is a disgrace. Now, local plans are obviously important to protect against speculative development, as are neighbourhood plans. I'm also incredibly grateful that there are individuals out there who are philanthropic in terms of bequeathing land or selling at peppercorn or potentially sub-agricultural rates, so that organisations like the Woodland Trust can step in, as has happened in Fordham, or other community trusts, as has happened a few metres over the border in sunny Neyland. And that is a great example of how we can do things a bit differently. I do think that we have collectively, and I say we collectively, have failed to have a mature conversation about airspace in Colchester. I'm disappointed that if you go through Chelmsford, you will see dense apartment blocks around the train station. But in Colchester, we've got quite a lot of 3-storey townhouses. I don't quite get that. I think that was a missed opportunity. And also, you can look at some other potential sites, can't you? The airspace above the Sainsbury's off Queen Street. The airspace, sorry, Councillor Goss, you probably have a strong view on it, but I used to live there. The airspace around North Station Road car park. I mean, why isn't there going to be a multi-storey car park put there? And you could free up some more space for some non-car dependent residential units. We are here this evening also in the context that the Borough Council and Essex County Council are seeking to develop a master plan for the historic town centre, largely centred around St Botolph's, but actually further afield. We also know, don't we, that retail has changed and that there are going to be small, I accept small, Windville sites where there'll be potential for residential happening within historic urban Colchester. Now, over the last 14 years, you've only had a Conservative administration for 1 year, and that was with coalition partners, the independent councillors. So I have to say to you, I don't feel like this is a Conservative plan. And I think that the Liberal Democrat and Labour councillors are going to need to own it. I've heard the use this evening, rather a lot of the word could. So I guess the question to the officers I would have is, you know, if this wasn't to happen, is it could have speculative development or is it would? Because we have a 5-year supply. And as Sir Bob Russell has pointed out, we have in excess of 1,200 more resi units in this over the entire period. So I'd like some clarity on that. And I say this with a heavy heart. I came here with an open mind. I've read the agenda items. I read the mods as soon as they arrived. At this stage, I am here and I'm minded not to support the inclusion of Middlewick in this local plan. And I understand the ramifications for that. I'm worried about the numbers on Middlewick going up. It's happening right now in Great Hawksley, isn't it? Where originally outline permission for 100 is given and then suddenly the developer comes in and says, oh, I want 120. So where's the guarantees it's not going to go up there? I'm worried that we have appalling public transport, in particular in South Colchester. Mr. Acker, you speak eloquently and probably with more knowledge on many things than I, but your journey into Colchester is going to get challenged with 1,000+ more cars on the road. And it will be cars. It will be, because we're not in this country brave enough to do what some of our European urban centres have done with public transport. I'm also really worried about the damaging consequences of not having a green lung in the south of Colchester. And I pay tribute to Sir Bob Russell because I know how much he was involved in Highwoods, and he will know that I cycle through that very frequently. And yes, there was housing, but my word, to have that green lung there, it's just magical. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Laws. I think Karen has picked out the questions in there, so I'll let her respond. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we might have a planner in the making in your son. It sounds like he's more educated than many. I don't think it's a fact that we failed to have a conversation about airspace. I just think it's high-rise development is more appropriate in some areas than it is others. Certainly down at the Hive, the university areas, there has been some high-rise development. Sometimes development's been put forward and planning committee have struggled to accept, you know, the height of development. It certainly is an option to build up, but perhaps not everywhere. Sainsbury's in the town centre, probably an area that will be looked at as part of the town centre master plan. The work that has recently been started as an opportunity to look at what happens there and in fact other parts of the town centre. 1,000 cars at Middlewick or 1,000 homes scattered around the borough without infrastructure. I guess that's the obvious comparison. It's not as simple as that, but you know, 10 sites of 100 dwellings scattered about won't deliver you a new primary school, won't deliver improvements to a bus service. So what you are left with is rural areas where public transport doesn't tend to be so good, having to, and it's probably too far to walk or cycle, having to rely completely on the car, which will only add to congestion. And Sandra has a response about the Natural England point, just to pick up, they did respond to the recent modifications consultation.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, as Karen said, other than that, we're not aware of any more recent letter, but if that is the case, then we'd like to know about it. But in terms of their representation, they did comment on Middlewick, but their comments were really about reminding the local planning authority about needing to have recognising the site as a local wildlife site and needing to have proper regard for responsibilities and the need to ensure that proper consideration of biodiversity net gain, mitigation and compensation, and just sort of demonstrate the responsibility in that context, which I think the inspector considered those comments, and the approach that's been taken in the modifications and the measures that are put in place in the policy, I think would suggest cover that point. And just finally, no comment in that representation was made by Natural England about triple SI designation, which I think has been referred to as well. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Laws, you want to come back?
Just very quickly, could I get clarity on the point around the 5-year supply and the point that Sir Bob made that we're actually suggesting 1,200 more than it was about 1,200 more than we actually need over the entire period?
Yeah, but housing supply is, as any of you have listened to me go on about it before, is a dark art. And I wish I had a simple answer, and I'm probably going to confuse people more than answer, but I will attempt to. We have to provide for a 15-year supply in the local plan. It's a 15-year supply from adoption. So in theory, this plan should be for a longer period than we're looking at now because of the length of delay to the examination. When submitted, it was 2017 to 2033, expecting it to be adopted in 2018. So we have to provide for that. Along the way, even since submission, we've had sites fall away, the largest being the garden community at West Tay. We also lost 200 dwellings at Tollgate. So some of these numbers have had to be addressed. Not every site in that 15-year supply will deliver. So we can't assume every site will come forward and deliver at the optimal number of dwellings. So there always needs to be some contingency. The 5-year supply then becomes more important for decision-making on planning applications. So we have to be able to continually demonstrate a 5-year supply, and that's a 5-year supply of deliverable sites. They have to be available, achievable, and deliverable now. So even sites with outline planning permission don't necessarily count as deliverable. We have to provide a lot of detailed evidence to substantiate that. Sites that are within the 5-year supply are there because they tend to be being built out. So many of our sites are now being built out. And because it's continuous, each year, come April, May time, we're looking at preparing for the next year. So we need more sites to come forward to backfill, I suppose, what have been built out in the previous year. So it's not, we've got a 5-year supply, great. It's a continuous process.
You know, I think history, if you look back at the recession of 2008, we'll see a huge fall in what we actually built because developers were literally trying to give away blocks of flats because they needed to get cash in. And in fact, I remember doing a walkabout with the site manager of the Taylor Wimpey development, which was known as St James's 2, which is Bradford Drive area, heavily overdeveloped. And I remember Barry Pennock, who was the site manager, I remember it still, remember his name, where he was literally checking the Taylor Wimpey share price because it was dropping literally, you know, by the second because the whole housing market was in crisis. Not to say that's not going to happen again with the current global uncertainties. So I think Karen is right. Just because something is in the plan or it has planning permission doesn't mean it will get built. Because once you've got detailed planning, doesn't mean they will build it. And you can't by law force somebody to build something that they've got planning permission for. Builder could go bankrupt, they might change their mind, they might put it on ice like the Severals development happened, because that was going to get sold for £80 million again because of the global crash. Taylor Wimpey then offered £15 million to the NHS, and the NHS said, no, we'll mothball it, not willing to take that hit. So these things affect what happens to the local plan, to housing build, and you do have to take that into account looking at some of the history. So I think that probably gives you some real life experience that has happened, and you can see those figures. Unless there's anything else, we'll move on to Councillor Kirby Taylor, please.
Thank you very much. As I'm sure you saw, I was a little bit delayed coming back from London here. I'm very sorry. I was able to watch all of the public representation while I was sitting on the train. So thank you very much for your contributions. But I think I did miss some of the officers' replies. So if it pleases the chair, I'd like to ask for 2 points to be clarified before I actually move on to my points. The first is, was it clarified if there is any way that we can actually make changes to the section 2 of the local plan, or that it is fixed and it is now either the whole thing that we are adopting and the whole thing we are rejecting? And the second point I would like to have clarification on is a phrase that I've seen written down a couple of times but have never been given a full explanation of, which is presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is put in place for towns and boroughs without a local plan. If I could get clarity on those 2 points before I actually make my main point.
I'll take point 1 and defer point 2 to Karen or one of the officers. Yes, it's been clearly stated tonight that we can't just take Middlewick out, we can't remove it. There would have to be a rework of the local plan, and it's the same when it goes to full council. We can't just take Middlewick out and then try and vote on it. It simply doesn't work like that. You'd have to go back and do a call for sites. You'd have to then look at other sites. You'd then have to go through all that evidence base. So no, absolutely, we can't just chop it out, I'm afraid. I'll defer the sustainable development question.
Thank you. Yes. The presumption in favour of sustainable development is set out in paragraph 11 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which is sometimes known as the NPPF. So it contains a section on plan making and what sustainable the presumption means for plan making. But you specifically asked about what it means in relation to decision taking and for plans that are out of date. So in decision making on applications, it means approving development proposals that accord with an up-to-date local plan and approving them without delay. Where there are no relevant plan policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date or don't exist, granting planning permission. So that's the presumption that you will grant planning permission unless the site is within a particularly protected area. And the footnote contains a list of those areas. So it would be habitat sites listed in a certain paragraph and or designated as sites of special scientific interest, green belt, local green space with a formal allocation rather than an informal use, area of outstanding natural beauty, such as the Dedham Vale, a national park, or defined as a heritage coast, irreplaceable habitats, designated heritage assets, and other assets of archaeological interest, and areas at risk of flooding or coastal change. So they're the exemptions from the presumption in favour of development. I would say in the appeals that we have considered and put up a case for, and they've included Tiptree, Mersey and West Burgo, then that presumption would have applied or has applied in some of those instances. So they weren't considered to be of an exception.
Thank you. Hopefully that's answered them thoroughly for you. So if you'd like to make your points or ask further questions, that would be appreciated.
Yes, thank you very much. So I also received quite a large number of emails from residents. I did make a point of replying to every single person who sent me a representation, including one person who was asking me about something completely different, but that was at about midnight, so I think they understood why. Several people have said that we're between a rock and a hard place here. I really don't think that's the case, because a rock and a hard place implies that there is some kind of sunlit uplands that you can squeeze your way out into. I think the only way I have found of thinking about where we are here and now today is the classic trolley problem. We are not going to be able to find a solution that works and can keep Middlewick from being developed on and guarantee that we won't build on it. All we can do is find a way of minimising the damage, minimising the risk, and allowing us to review it as soon as we can. Presumption in favour of sustainable development means that, as I understand it, because it does not have that formal designation of a SSSI or area of outstanding natural beauty like Dedham Vale, there will be an assumption that it can be built on. And that assumption will be essentially legally upheld. There are conditions in the local plan on building on Middlewick. There's the master plan, there's conditions with the 30-year liability. We need to know if those can still be applied if there is no local plan. or if we can only actually enforce that kind of administrative difficulty on planning permissions if they are backed up by the local plan. These difficulties are going to make the Wick very unattractive for development, particularly when more attractive sites are available in the local plan. What we need to do, I feel, is keep up pressure, keep up the noise, and buy time until we can review. That is the only way we're going to do this. I believe, from the evidence available to me, the less damaging track, and that is what it is a less damaging track. It is not a good solution. It is the less bad solution. Is to work together and find a way of adapting it after it's been adopted. It's the only way I can see of making it work. If we work together, we may actually be able to pick that person up before the tram reaches them.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to respond to the questions?
Yes, just to pick up on that, the presumption in favour of development will apply to Middlewick if there's no local plan in place, and particularly if there's no 5-year housing land supply. Development on that site, and indeed other sites in the borough, can only be controlled if there's a local plan policy. And you're right, I agree, the criteria in the modifications or the modified plan will make development of that site difficult. It's certainly the longest allocation policy in the local plan by a long way, and that's because of the constraints that are placed on any future development.
I think just to add to that, I think probably answer the other point, that criteria wouldn't apply if there wasn't a local plan with a policy such as that in, if development were to come forward outside of the local plan process, if it wasn't adopted in it.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Councillor Paul Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Councillor Kirby Taylor has covered a lot of the points I was thinking of. The key thing I see here is that we have a very difficult decision. There is, in my opinion, no way that if we do not proceed with this local plan, we could get another one done in time for the end of 2023. I noted that you said that originally we were planning to have this one agreed in 2018. Well, we're 3 years late in that one, so we can't start again and get it done. And from what you've said, it's very clear it is start again right from the word go. So that gives us a very difficult situation. If we don't have a local plan, even a not very good local plan, we're in real problems, because every area of Colchester, Mersey, where Councillor Ackers spoke very clearly about, and other areas, including my own ward, would be subject to speculative development that has ruined parts of Colchester in the past. And that's something which is very difficult for me to allow, because as a councillor, I was elected to take the tough decisions, because quite frankly, you don't need any help to take easy decisions. And this is a tough one. And yes, we could kick the can down the road and hope that in 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, we're back with a plan, and maybe the same audience, or maybe a different audience from a different part of the town. But in the meantime, the developers would have come in and would have ravished Colchester and taken the best of the sites. And what impresses me with what's in the local plan protecting Middleweight is very strong planning constraints, constraints that a planning committee could use to reject the application. And it's been mentioned what guarantees you've got. Well, at the planning committee on Thursday night, and 3 of us, I think, were there, we rejected a planning application that failed to meet the local plan because it didn't meet what Wivenhoe had asked for. And that we could do that because it didn't meet the local plan. Any planning application that we reject will, on a big development, go to appeal because there's big money involved. And when that appeal comes up, we're in a much, much stronger position against the government inspector to say we've rejected this because it's not in full compliance with our local plan, rather than we rejected it because, well, we haven't got a local plan, so we've just got a real problem. So for that reason, I'm coming to the conclusion that we've got a choice between this local plan or no local plan, and I would be failing in my job as a councillor if I gave over the development of Colchester to the developers. It's for the council to make those tough decisions, and councillors, this is a night for tough decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I didn't think there was any questions to respond to in there. I think there's more a point and agreement. So we'll move to Councillor McLean, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to add to that, that the poor urban development that will come from having no plan will affect Colchester for generations. You're looking at hundreds of years of bad buildings, bad road networks, communities with no public amenities. What I would like to ask is if Karen could be very clear on what will happen to Middlewick if we don't have a local plan, because it's of my understanding that under the local plan, we're building on 40% of it, but without a local plan, it could be up to 85%.
Thank you. Karen, if you could just answer those 2 points, please.
First of all, as I said, the policy that we've got in the revised version of the plan tightly controls what development can take place there and how much, and the supporting infrastructure. Without the local plan, we don't have that policy framework. The MOD can still go ahead and sell the site. It's got development potential. An independent inspector has found it suitable for development. What we have done through the local plan process is reduce the amount of built development that can take place. And you're correct, it is on about 40% of the area. That means we can preserve the remaining 60% for open space uses. And that type of open space use is still to be determined. Now, if the MOD sells the site to a developer, they are at liberty to make a planning application, regardless of whether there is a policy or not. So they can make a planning application for 2,000 new homes. So thinking about where they might be, how much land that would take, you would think it would be at least 80%. You might have to factor in additional community assets. 2,000 new homes in that area might justify a new secondary school or something like that, which create, more of a land take then. So yes, you're right, there would be significantly more development if a proposal did put forward many more houses. There's also the possibility of the MOD using the site for something else, or someone else buying the site and using it for something else. So I believe in Braintree district at Wethersfield, the site there that the MOD have declared surplus to their needs is being promoted for a prison. So, there's other uses which could come forward, not only on Middlewick. I'm not trying to suggest that will be singled out, but there's other sites in the borough that without a plan, we can't control development so well.
Thank you. Then got Councillor Barber again, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just firstly on the actual decision-making process, you mentioned about it going to full council with a recommendation of rejection. However, in the papers, it says the only alternative option this evening is to withdraw the Section 2 plan and start again. How does the vote work in the local plan? Will we, if councillors voted against the recommendation to scrap the plan, what would happen then at full council? Is it automatically adopted as a result, or I'd just be interested in the process on that. I do have a couple of other points. That was just the first question.
Well, let me tackle that first,
Okay.
because you could be a bit quick fire and I want to make sure we cover everything. So I think Karen was really clear. If we do not adopt or suggest to full council that we adopt the local plan, a recommendation will go to full council to reject the local plan. I think Karen was clear on that, which means it would then get withdrawn. It would get withdrawn, and then we would obviously have to start again, and we would have no local plan for part 2 for any of those sites.
But my point is, councillors will be voting on the recommendation still. So what happens if they then vote against that recommendation? If they disagree with the local plan committee, that's my question.
Right. So it's very, very clear. If for instance, we as the local plan committee decide to send it to full council for approval, full council could object it. So you need 26 councillors to approve the adoption of the local plan out of 51, if my maths is correct. I think it is. You can't have a half a councillor, I'm afraid.
There's only 50 don't post.
That is true, but by then they'll
Not necessarily.
No, there won't be 50. So you're right. It would have to be 25 or more, or 26 or more. Yeah. So that will then get adopted. If, of course, council was minded to reject what the local plan committee decided, they could in theory put another proposal forward to say, well, we actually think we should adopt the local plan. So that could happen at full council, I would think, procedurally. Okay. We'd have to check that with Andrew Weavers, but I believe that's what full council is there for. So it's not very clear. That's my point. You said it was very clear, but it's not. Yeah. And I just think it is. It's just not in the papers. That's how the steps would make. On the alternative options, it's to withdraw tonight is the implied alternative option this evening. That was my issue on that, but I think we will have to have clarity if that's a decision on local plan committee, but we can deal with that thereafter, basically, because we do only have 2 votes effectively. My second question is just on neighbourhood plans and the impact of adopted neighbourhood plans. I think not least probably, as John Acker has mentioned, neighbourhood plans, what the impact would be on adopted neighbourhood plans as a result of a decision to reject the local plan, as well as those being in the process of being made. I think that would be useful. There was also the discussion about the MOD's intentions of the site. Have we had any recent discussions about their intentions in regards to 2,000 homes? And when was the last time we've been told as an authority they would be considering 2,000 homes on the site? I'd just be interested to know how updated that was in the MOD's thinking for it to be part of our consideration. All I would say is the time frame of preparing local plan, Councillor Smith, was largely due to the pushing of the garden communities, and if we had been listened to earlier, my colleagues, Councillor Sunnox in particular, have been listened to earlier, we probably wouldn't have had such a delay, but that is still tied into the decision we're making this evening. We have taken so long to get here because of the fast. That was the garden community. So my 3 questions are on one has been answered, the neighbour plans, and then about when we last had conversations with the MOD and they expressed an interest in 2,000 homes on the site. Before we answer, can I just draw as chair? I always prided myself on running this committee very quasi-judicial with no politics. Can I just remind all committee members, I would like to uphold that respect that I've always tried as chair to uphold myself.
It was a fact.
So can we just keep it to the facts, no
I
politics?
Did. Well, that was why it's delayed.
I may respectfully disagree. Karen,
it's not quasi-judicial either.
Okay. I still maintain that it's quite a straightforward decision to be made. The alternative option is to withdraw the plan, but this committee cannot make that decision. It will still be referred to full council. So that is the alternative option, to withdraw the plan, but that recommendation has to go to full council. Turning to neighbourhood plans, the implications are that they will have to take more growth, those areas that do have a neighbourhood plan, because we'll be starting with a new housing figure, and we will have to restart the assessment of sites that are deliverable and developable, and start that whole process again, by which time neighbourhood plans will have matured as well. So yes, I can't say that an area will be excluded because they benefit from having a neighbourhood plan. 2,000 homes, I'm not suggesting it's in the MOD's mind. They're not interested in numbers because they'll be selling the site. So I wouldn't like to speculate what developers might be interested in, how many numbers they're thinking about. The only correspondence we've had with the MOD at a higher level is about their disposal programme. And I think they pushed Middleweight back to 2022 and brought the Abro site forward from memory, but I could check that if need be.
So we can't really take into account the 2,000 homes possibility. It's been mentioned this evening quite a few times, that's all, but we can't really speculate on that.
Well, as much as other people can speculate about it, what I'm trying to say in response to the questions is the best way of ensuring that 2,000 homes don't come forward is to have a policy which limits it to 1,000. I think that was fair enough to say, and it's reasonable given that their initial submission was for 2,000 new homes.
Well, that's my point. When did they last? So they haven't said that lately, that they're interested in 2,000 homes like that original submission. That was my query. That's
No.
not very updated.
No,
That's
they
my point.
haven't.
Okay, thanks.
No, but I think the point is the more houses that could get put on there puts the land value up, doesn't it? I think that's the point. That's what a developer would want to do, to maximise the return on investment. And I think that's part of the concern.
And therefore, by extension, I would say that by including the site in the local plan, we're increasing the interest in the site from developers because it has greater potential through that allocation. There is less desire to have a site without an allocation than if we're putting in the plan. So it doesn't protect it in any way of having it in the plan, because you're instantly giving it value and interest, because we're saying, yes, build 1,000 homes. That's the issue. That's the crux of it. You're not protecting anything. You're saying you're giving a green light to at least 1,000 homes.
Personally, I'm not going to spend all night debating it, but what I would just suggest is that no, if there's no protection on the land, potentially an application could come in for 2,000 houses and then it gets sold at a higher land value because you're building more houses on it. I thought that was fairly obvious. Anyway, let's move on if all your points are done, because we've got Councillor Sunnox to speak next, please.
Yes, thank you. And I've been very influenced and moved by the many speakers against Middleweight. And I agree, it's not a good one. It's not a good one at all. The question I want to ask is whether this is really the best way of opposing it to throw out the plan. And my view is that we're throwing the baby out of the bathwater and getting unbalanced about it. And I feel that we have to remember that the MOD is not a house builder. It's not them that wants to build 1,000 or 2,000 houses. They need to sell it to a house builder. And this is what I know about. I know about site values and appraisals and so on. And the inspector has done really quite a good job on loading up the ship with quite a lot of infrastructure that will push its value down. And when house builders, before they buy a site like that, they will darken Karen's door and they will come for an indication, you know, are you really going to want this sort of transport assessment, and can we shove it all under the carpet? And I hope that she will say, no, we're absolutely serious about that. And what's more, we're preparing an infrastructure inventory. And I'm beginning to sound like a broken record on this. We don't know as a town where we have a shortfall. That's why we can't articulate it in our Section 106 agreements and in our plans and in our submissions to government for grants. If we have that, and there's a tremendous deficit in South Colchester, if we have that, we can load that ship so full of infrastructure that it sinks. And I think with the biodiversity net gain argument and so on, that doesn't cost nothing to do that. You've got to maintain a similar site for 30 years, and that's got to be funded up front if we look at the rules strictly. If we take what the inspector's given us and we apply it rigorously and we know what our infrastructure deficit is, I feel that's the most effective way of opposing Middleweight, and that it would be irresponsible not to take the plan forward in some way. And that if we go and muff it, we'll end up losing control as they have in some other councils, and that it's okay for green belt councils to lose control because they have the green belt. If we lose control, we'll be in the deep, I don't know what, we'll be in trouble. I've got one further question for Karen. Is there not a third option? I mean, we're presented with it as very black and white, either yes or no. There is a third, that we could advise the council to wait until sometime in 2023 and hope that something turns up. I think it's a pretty useless option, but something may turn up in that time. We may well have a housing recession. We may have all sorts of things might turn up, but I don't think I favour that option, but I just don't feel comfortable being, I feel somewhat that we're rammed into a rock and a hard place. There is another way we could try and snuggle our way out of it.
Karen, if you'd like to respond to the points.
Yes, thank you. And I do keep trying to reassure you that that infrastructure audit is underway, and we were holding out for adoption to inform the next plan, but you know, that recognise that it would be useful to have sooner rather than later. So the funding is there to undertake that work, which we will commence. In terms of a third option, I think, again, I agree with you that I'm not sure there's any benefit to waiting to 2023. I can't see anything in the government's bill that will be introduced that will change what we need to do. I don't think the government will take away the threat of intervention. In fact, in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, they actually mentioned some specific body that could be used if a county council wasn't used to write the plan for you. So I wouldn't advise waiting until 2023. We tried to think of all the available options, but I think there really are just the two.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Councillor Arnold was next. No, she doesn't wish to speak. That's fine. Any other speakers? Okay, we'll go with Councillor Rippingdale next, please.
I would like to thank the committee for their measured views on this argument, because it's been quite useful for me to have some different thoughts about this. Like most of you, I came into this very open-minded. However, this committee must consider the future of the whole of Colchester. It's not an easy task for any of us, and I want everyone to believe that. Middleweight is a single issue in the local plan, and it does not mean I support the building on Middleweight Ranges, but more that the committee must weigh up the risk to Colchester as an entire entity versus the loss of this habitat. The fact we will be retaining 60% of the land as open, accessible space to the public and look to protect this space for future generation is a better plan than speculative development, in my opinion. My understanding around the Middleweight Range issue is that the council has limited control in this situation. The Ministry of Defence has suffered a series of cuts for its funding, which is part of the reason the site is being disposed of. The council does not have the funding to purchase the land, and there would be an argument whether this would be the best use of our already limited resources, which have been impacted by recent events. I also understand we have very little movement now in terms of planning law, as the planning inspector has deemed the plan sound. Having read the planning inspector's modifications, and I have read 650 pages of it, additional protections have been put in place for this site, which I believe would make it difficult and expensive to deliver the site. My concern around this is that actually how many of these homes would be affordable to local residents, given the difficulties and the cost of the site. I do have some concerns over the local plan which need to be addressed in the master planning, and this is not limited to Middlewick, but to the town centre also, and how we develop in the reduction of need of type of retail space we currently have. Retail has changed. I come from this background. It's not the same as it was 20 years ago. A reluctance to accept this in some quarters is concerning, and we need to look at the existing space and how this can be utilised to create a vibrant, dynamic city centre. The answer isn't in larger retailers anymore. They are unreliable and will quit a town centre to dictated by profit. In regards to Middlewick, I do have some questions about the policies. In policy MM46, why was the Nature Conservation Management Organisation to be appointed by the developer rather than the council? Doesn't this leave us open to monitoring being manipulated to the development's favour? Is there any reason also why Middlewick was not classed as an irreplaceable habitat as described in policy ENV1 environment, given there's no guarantee the habitat can be recreated in other parts of the Wick? This refers to section part D of the policy. Is developing the Wick ranges wholly in exceptional reasons, and what is the compensation strategy? Also, there's been discussions about what guarantees there would be to keep the numbers at 1,000 homes. Can you detail what guarantees we could put in place to ensure that these numbers don't go above 1,000 or the Wick is not developed any further? And I have a further question around the master plan. Could the master plan go ahead without the local plan? I don't want to risk the development of the town centre and other areas, but if there's options to develop it in a master plan, could we go ahead with this?
Thank you. Some really good questions and points there. Karen, if you can start, and then I guess Sandra may cover some of it as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I think going to the sort of more detailed points first, really. The nature conservation requirement, reference is made to the developer because they would be expected to pay for it. However, we would control and need to agree who that specialist was. So we would have an overview of that. Limit to 1,000 dwellings, policy stipulates that now, and the evidence base and the requirements that the inspector has added are based on a maximum of 1,000 dwellings. So the transport approach, the infrastructure requirements are all based on no more than 1,000 dwellings. So it could fall away if there was any more put forward. A master plan could be developed for the site without the local plan. However, it wouldn't carry any weight or would carry substantially reduced weight in any decision making because there wouldn't be a policy to hang it off, so we couldn't adopt it as a supplementary planning document. And I've asked Sandra to pick up the habitat and compensation strategy comments.
So I might need reminding of the detail of that, apologies, but I was looking up at the reference for the earlier point. Could you just specifically refer to that point again? Sorry, apologies.
Councillor Rippingdale, if you can just repeat those 2 points, please.
So the point was, is there any reason why Middlewick would not be classed as an irreplaceable habitat as described in policy ENV1 environment, given there's no guarantee that the habitat could be recreated on other parts of the Wick? It's part D of the policy states is developing the Wick wholly in exceptional reasons.
Right. I think my answer to that is that the evidence that was available to the inspector was done solely in wholly in accordance with the I can't remember the name of the body, the Institute for Ecology, forgive me, I've lost my reference, and the evidence from those that challenged that evidence was also before the inspector. There was a vast volume of ecological information, that was appropriate for the consideration of an allocation of the local plan that was available to the inspector, both on behalf of the Defence and Infrastructure Organisation and by parties who were questioning the validity of some of that. And if that was thought to be the position by the various experts, including Natural England, who also did engage in the process, that was not thought to be the case. So I think based on the evidence that's available, it's been thoroughly considered and provided by the reputable experts on that specialism. I think that's the reason why it's been treated in that way.
Thank you.
Did we have any clarity on what the actual compensation strategy would be for that land? A further question would be, what protections could we put in place for the remaining open land, and could this not be written into the local plan before adoption?
No. Master plan. Yeah, that will be addressed in the master plan, and the policy requires the strategy to be provided as part of the later planning process. So I think the measures are there to make sure that is known before the final planning application decision is made, rather than at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I think that's answered everything. I believe the next speaker is Councillor Jocelyn Law, please.
Thank you. I know that this has been a difficult decision, and that all councillors have spent a good deal of time reading through paperwork and listening to opinions. And I recognise that everyone has very heartfelt views on this subject. And much has been made of Highwoods Country Park, which I know is a really valuable resource in my ward. But I also feel that this also feeds into the nature within which planning and development can also safeguard open spaces across the borough. For example, if we have plans in place in Section 106 contributions, we're able to safeguard open spaces, or we're able to provide the infrastructure and the schools that are needed in different areas. And this is important across the borough. And I'm also very concerned, I think my question would really be, if we did not have a local plan in place, although we have a deadline till the end of 2023 to have a new plan, we would be without a plan. And so there could be speculative development that would not take into account any sort of plans or policies that we have in place that would be looking to safeguard, or, protections, or to try and make sure that we have the infrastructure in place. And can you answer that query, please?
Yeah, well, I can answer it, but I'll let Karen give you the more detailed professional response.
Thank you. I think you're correct about, and it's perhaps a point that's been lost tonight because of the focus on Middlewick, about the benefits and the positive aspects that having a local plan can bring. It isn't just the threats of speculative development, but it's also the protection that can be afforded to many areas of the borough, whether it be small areas of incidental open space that are protected for that use, or larger areas. If we have no local plan, we could be subject to speculative development, and to a small degree we already have been, and that's what demonstrates the real possibility of it occurring more so. So developers have certainly taken the opportunity that the delay to the local plan and the neighbourhood plan in Tiptree has caused, and 300 dwellings have been allowed in Tiptree, which is contrary to their neighbourhood plan. And the local plan for Tiptree removes one of the areas of growth that Tiptree neighbourhood plan group requested. So it's quite important for them that no more speculative development happens. But we do know there's another 2 appeals in the pipeline there. We also only need to look over the border into tendering to see some of the consequences of them not adopting their local plan until recently. The site which is closest to many people is the one on Bromley Road. And this council objected to that scheme, and we objected partly because it was in the broad area of search for the garden community, but also because we didn't think it was a suitable site for development, especially being so close to Salary Brook. But the council didn't have a local plan, they didn't have allocated sites, and they didn't have a 5-year housing land supply. So that appeal was allowed. And I think those sorts of examples demonstrate what can happen without the local plan.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor McLean, you wanted to speak again? No, okay. Any other councillors wishing to speak? No, okay, thank you. Well, it's chairman's prerogative now, and this is what I tend to do when I chaired the committee last time, is I listen to all of you and then I, in effect, sum up with my thoughts and views, although I have made some of them public. We have a really important decision to make tonight about whether we go forward with the local plan as is documented, as is approved by the government planning inspector, who is professionally qualified in what they do. It is their job, it is their profession, where they have to listen to local concerns, they have to listen and read lots of documents that are submitted, they have to have a public hearing. And this local plan has been through, or probably one of the most, in the 14 years I've been a councillor, this has been through the most rigorous process that I've ever known a local plan to go through, and has been through multiple levels of consultation, particularly around Middleweight Ranges. And we have not mentioned any other site tonight that's in this local plan. We've only focused on one site, and I can understand why, but there are many other sites in the local plan, but we haven't spoken about any of them. We've spoken about bad development. We've made references to Highwoods Country Park and how that was funded by development. There were 10 councils in the UK that chucked out their local plans for various reasons, and the latest one was Castle Point, when there was a change of administration, and I read the cabinet report, or the report that was done. Their local plan goes back to 1998. They haven't managed to get that act together to get a local plan through. Now they leave themselves at even greater risk. And I think the costs to the council fighting speculative development, and also to restart their local plan again, is something like £4 million, I seem to recall in the report, if I read it correctly. But there are other councils that have also done similar things for different reasons and left themselves exposed. That hasn't really come up much tonight, which I was surprised about, but I just thought I'd make reference to that. We've heard about Bromley Road. We've heard about, that's on the Colchester border. It's not a popular development, and it's causing all sorts of issues for local neighbours and concerns. But tendering gets all the Section 106 agreement money. We get nothing, absolutely nothing for that happening. And I also remember going to a hearing where I felt I was being cross-examined. Wasn't the best barrister, I have to say. It was Gladman's, Baker's Lane, and that's in Councillor Barber's ward, just up the road from him, where we were defending as a council speculative development on what in effect was a greenfield site, which is what Gladman's do. They buy up sites, they try and launch appeals, and they win something like 50% of them. That's their business model, because they go after councils that don't have any protection. They might decide to buy Middleweight Ranges from the MOD if it's not protected in the local plan. And I remember the planning inspector actually having to call out the barrister cross-examining me, saying, Mr. Goss is not on trial. I'm sure there's a few that probably like me to be, but that is how that's how professional they come, with huge, great legal teams that obviously try and argue a case to get speculative development approved. And then what they tend to do is sell those sites on. That is their business model. That is how they make money. And any site that is not protected could undergo the Gladman's treatment. Just look up Gladman's and you will see that they've got many planning appeals across the country that the inspectorate in Bristol has to deal with. So I do absolutely understand the passion and the concern about Middleweight Ranges and the history, But if we don't put this plan through, there will be a planning application that will be put in where we cannot control it, and therefore more than 40% of that land would get built on. And I have to say, I have to pay credit to Sir Bob Russell. He's a smart man. He wouldn't have been doing what he's been doing for over 50 years, and he wouldn't have been awarded a knighthood. He was obviously a constituency MP for 18 years. He knows how government works, and he knows how to get things done and how not to get things done. And I call it the Sir Bob Russell plan, and it was, and I've made certainly in some public responses reference to it, where one of his ideas to protect the Wick was to move the housing south and to put it in an enclave of trees. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And a lot of politicians signed up to that. A lot of political groups signed up to that, including my own group. And I think the Labour group and I think the Conservative group were quite on board with it. I think he had conversations with Andrew Ellis about that. So he's been looking at ways of trying to mitigate the impact on Middlewick. And I think there's a lot to be said for what we call the Sir Bob Russell plan. Maybe that will end up in the local plan. But what he's talking about, that's a master plan, because a master plan will actually document all of these things at a high level and decide where the housing goes. And that's where the local community, some of the people here tonight, and Nick Chilvers, again, a very wisdom-filled man, has made reference to this at a couple of meetings, that actually the local community should be properly consulted through all sorts of mediums, workshops, offline, online, for those in the media industry, and make sure they're involved in having their say and actually having a master plan. And in effect, this is what happened in Mile End in the end. A master plan was done before the housing came, so we at least tried to influence some of it, and actually some of the infrastructure that we will end up with, such as community centres and improvements to existing infrastructure deficits. So I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've had, I think, a very reasoned debate. We've had a lot of fact-based and emotional representations from 10 speakers. We've also had thousands of comments, or over 1,100 comments, I seem to recall, including some from myself, to the inspectorate, particularly around Middlewick. But I also remember Mr. Acker attending many panel meetings, and it's fair to say that Mr. Acker and I didn't always have the same view. He was very passionate about Mersey. The work they did there drove down the amount of housing, and they have won some appeals there. So again, that's a credit to working with the mechanisms that are available and reducing the impact on those communities. So here's where I am. Having listened to debate, and I've said this publicly, I think up to 1,000 houses will end up on Middlewick over time. If we don't do our job tonight, the impact of that could be worse. And through the master plan, through the Sir Bob Russell plan, you shunt that housing and you move it where it doesn't impact or has least impact, and the community can help influence that. And this is what I need to say to the community. If this local plan goes through, that is what you need to do. You need to engage with the master planning process, attend the workshops, move that housing, and listen to what Sir Bob Russell says. Actually listen to what the man says, because he's extremely smart. So I think there's a lot to be said about what he has suggested. The country park absolutely protects the rest of that land. If we lock it into a country park, could you imagine somebody trying to put houses on Cymbeline Meadows, which again was another Sir Bob Russell project in 1990. I now live there, I have access to it, and it's now mature woodland that is enjoyed. It's actually a best kept secret because people don't use it as much as Highwoods. There's an underpass from where I live. So these projects can be really, really successful for future generations. And actually, putting a country park in the Borough Council's control means that you have it for full public access, that it's not in private ownership, that there's not a risk a prison could be built on it or anything else. We want to make sure every part of that land is accessible as much as possible, and a country park owned and managed by the Borough Council with the right Section 106 agreement, of course, to contribute to it is the right approach. And this local plan and a master plan would help deliver that and lock it in and guarantee it, because the Borough Council is not going to sell a country park and build on it. It's protected, a bit like you can put playing fields into the, into the protection as well, which we've done with the Mile End playing fields to protect it from ever being sold or built on. So there are protections that you can afford to parks and land, because I've been involved in some of it. So as much as it pains me to say it, I don't think we really have a choice other than to put through and recommend the local plan. And I do understand the concerns about this, but I think it's the best chance for the community to influence and save as much of that land, make it more publicly accessible and potentially improve it with some investment, because the MOD isn't going to invest in that land. It's quite simple. They want to sell it for the highest capital receipt. And again, something else that Bob Russell did in early submissions from the MOD, Bob Russell put in FOI requests and in all that documentation, 2,000 houses were what the MOD always said in the early submissions. It's there, it's fact. So Bob Russell found that information. It's not hidden, it's there. So my view and direction to the committee, having listened to everything tonight, is that we recommend the decisions of 2.1 and 2.2, and we move and vote to take the local plan forwards as suggested. And that is what I would like to put to the committee at this time. And we still have 3 other items, but obviously we will have a break once this is concluded. Councillor Barber.
Please, can we have a named vote on this? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, without question, that is absolutely fine. So if everyone is minded, then I would like to put to the vote that we would take 2.1 and 2.2. Do I have a seconder?
Chair, sorry, just before we go, just to clarify, procedure around name vote, we will need one councillor to propose and then 2 more to support.
Okay, well, Councillor Barber, I'm sure you're going to propose a named vote. Is anyone going to second a named vote? Right, Councillor Laws, that's carried, so that's fine. So we will have a named vote.
We just need 1 more member, Chair, so it's 3. So
okay, 1 more for a named vote. Okay, Councillor Summers, that's fine. That's democracy, that is fine. That's fine. So that is now going to be a named vote. So we will do that. So 2.1 and 2.2 will have a named vote. So we'll start.
Sorry, just apologies for being overly protective, Chair, but just to confirm who's the proposer and seconder of the motion.
Okay, okay, that is true. We need a proposer of the motion. I will propose. Is there a seconder? Okay, Councillor McLean. So then we will do the named vote.
So members, I will call your name and I will ask you to respond with for, against or abstention. So Councillor Tracy Arnold.
For.
Councillor Lewis Barber.
Against.
Councillor Martin Goss.
For.
Councillor Richard Kirby Taylor.
For.
Councillor Jocelyn Law.
For.
Councillor Sam McLean.
For.
Councillor Kaylee Rippingale.
For.
Councillor Paul Smith.
For.
Councillor William Sunnox.
Abstain.
Councillor Darius Laws.
Abstain.
So Chair, the vote is carried with 7 for, 1 against and 2 abstentions.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We will now take a 10-minute break. So back in here at 9:05, and thank you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back from the short break. We now move on to item 8 of the local plan agenda this evening. We've got 3 more items to get through, 2 neighbourhood plans and then some national updates under item 10. So we'll go straight to Sandra to talk about the Marks Tay neighbourhood plan and adoption of the West Mersey neighbourhood plan. So if you'd like to take us through the report quickly, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this report just is for members' information regarding the adoption of both the Marks Tay neighbourhood plan and West Mersey neighbourhood plans that both had successful referendums on the 17th of March. This has already come before full council just to formalise the decision that had to be made using the urgency measures due to the timing during PERDA prior to the elections. Both neighbourhood plans are now adopted and part of the Colchester local development plan, and I think we've already seen the benefits in the case of West Mersey in contributing to the successful recent appeal decision. So really for members' information, because it's important that these are now part of the development plan. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any speakers or any comments? No? Okay. Right, move to the recommendation then. All in favour? Unanimous? Okay. So if we move to item 9, the Great Hawksley Neighbourhood Plan, the area designation, and we'll hear from a new voice tonight. We'll move to Bethany Jones to present the report, please.
Thank you. So a report at the other end of the neighbourhood plan process. So the council have received an application from Great Hawksley Parish Council to prepare a neighbourhood plan. The first stage in the neighbourhood plan making process is to agree the area that the neighbourhood plan will cover. The application before the council is for the entire parish of Great Hawksley, and the council are asked to formally designate the Great Hawksley neighbourhood plan area.
Okay, short and sweet. Is there any questions or comments, or are you happy? Okay, Councillor Darius-Laws, please.
Just a very brief comment. This obviously falls within my division, and as I say to anyone that talks about housing in my division, if the parish council are happy, I am happy, and therefore I am happy.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? If not, can we adopt the recommended decision in 2.1, please? Okay.
We need a proposer and a second, a realistic chair. The previous one was just for noting, but this is an actual decision, so we should go with the proposer and second.
Councillor Laws, Darius-Laws as proposer, Councillor Barber as seconder. Okay, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous, that's good. Thank you. And then we move on to item 10, which again is Bethany. If you can just give us an update on the levelling up and regeneration. But I nearly called you Councillor Nick Chilvers then. Nick, if you'd like to come up and speak, please.
Councillors, I'm not going to have a gripe, so you can relax, except that levelling up, good. My particular interest, because I live in Old Heath, and I've lived there for 50 years. I know the area between Maglan Street and Mersey Road like the back of my hand. I'm interested in that area. Just a slight diversion. We've spoken a lot about High Woods, lovely area. Think also of Westlands. Very good job done there too. Managed by the council. Of course, the elephant in the room regarding levelling up is that of the road network. We've got high density Newtown, sort of built still in the days of the horse and cart, high density. Then we go down to the highs, and we've got high rise. And we've got narrow gateway streets into the town centre, being Mersey Road, Military Road. And the junction at Old Heath Road and Abbots Road next to the church is downright dangerous. It seems to have passed highways by. In fact, I have to say, the general feeling in our part of the world, part of Colchester, is there is no confidence in Essex County highways for rising to the occasion, especially with regards to Middleweight. Moving quickly on. Down at the highs, there's nothing there really for children. Play areas, very poor. Things like that, little things make a difference. Now, of course, in the old days, or going back to the 60s when they pushed Southway through, they managed to widen the roads, allow some space, get the traffic moving by CPOs. Probably wishful thinking nowadays, but Essex County Highway solution is get on your bike or a bus. Well, I tried to get from Old Heath to Cavalry Barracks to the pharmacy this morning. It took me 3/4 of an hour on foot, bus, foot. And I could have done it in 10 minutes in the car. And if I hadn't got a bus pass, I would have used my car. Just remember the B&Q site. Don't lose sight of that. Don't let that get built on for housing. Something's got to be done there that's useful to the community in the southeast. The north has Turner Rise, good for them. The west has Tollgate, good for them. What's the southeast got? We haven't even got a garden centre. And if we want to go anywhere, we have to cross town by bike or bus or the dreaded car. Well, of course, we're going to use a car. So, and let's remember, the bus station, yes, it does need improving. I don't expect a all sing and all dance and swanky bus station. I expect an improved one. But a better bus station won't necessarily take more cars off the road unless you give people more infrastructure in a wider sense, retail, health, other services, so they don't have to cross town. And of course, that would also sort of give employment opportunities too. So far, that's where we are. When you're looking forward, remember the little practical things. I've glanced at the report, says all the right things, aspirational, but when it comes down to detail.
Thank you. I was very generous myself, allowing you a lot more than the 3 minutes, but thank you. Because But
well, thank you very much,
fine,
Mr. Chairman.
I'm feeling very generous tonight. You know, it's that wisdom you see. We need to listen to it. Right. Thanks, everyone. Let's go to the report, please.
Thank you very much. So last month, the government published the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. This is seen as a key component to level up the country and build upon the earlier published Levelling Up white paper and incorporate some of the proposals for planning reform set out in the Planning for Future white paper in summer 2020. In relation to planning within the context of Colchester, some key headlines, we've already heard a few of those earlier tonight already, but are around local authorities will be required to have a design code in place covering their area. More weight will be given to local plans and neighbourhood plans. Development management policies will be set nationally. Authorities will no longer have to maintain a 5-year housing land supply if a local plan has been adopted within the past 5 years. It's likely to be increase in planning application fees, and a new infrastructure levy will be introduced to replace Section 106 planning obligations and seal the community infrastructure levy. So the bill is the first step in bringing forward changes to the planning system, but there will be further public consultation around associated regulations and national policy linked to the bill, including the NPPF, so the National Planning Policy Framework, the infrastructure levy, planning fees, and those national development management policies. So last week, the bill had its second reading in Parliament, where the debate focused quite heavily around the relationship between a local plan and national development management policies. And during this debate, the Secretary of State said that there will be a new NPPF from next month. When further details are available about that, we will obviously present those to Local Plan Committee. Any changes to the planning system will likely begin taking place from 2024 once the bill has received royal assent. Thank you.
Thank you. First councillor that wishes to speak is Councillor Barber and Councillor Summers. I thought you might. Especially as it's got Sill in there. Any other councillors after that?
Thank you, Chair. We'll answer doing that. Thank you, Bethany, for the report. Just a question. I don't know if you have this information yet or know offhand anyway, but for when the new levy is introduced, for existing Section 106 agreements, presumably they're still going to be in place if the money hasn't yet been spent. So, for example, in West Burgolt, a crossing may not be delivered for a bit of time, but there's money for it. I'm presuming that's not going to impact existing permissions. Thank you.
I think there hasn't been any transitional arrangements outlined in the bill yet. So how things may actually play out, we're unsure of. In terms of planning applications that will already, any sites that already have planning applications with Section 106, it's my understanding they will still be in place. They won't be affected by the new changes, but we will find out more as the bill makes its way through Parliament.
Thank you. Councillor Summers then, please.
Yes, I haven't got to grips with this bill at all yet, so thanks for the briefing. What would be really interesting is to hear probably Karen's view on how this affects us, how this will affect us over the next few years in Colchester. You know, assuming they get it through, it's got to a second reading in Parliament. It's still got its report stage. It's got some very controversial bits. There's a little bit that someone sent me about CPO rules. And I don't know whether that was inspired by the evident troubles that Colchester would have in CPOing land for garden communities, or whether that was part of it. But certainly there are major, almost expropriation of land value for landowners. If a landowner is sitting there with a site that's about to, that has hope value attached to it, the council can then come and CPO it back at its existing use value, which could be millions of pounds difference. So there's lots of controversial things in it. And I'd just be interested to hear how Karen thinks it will play into, will it put Colchester in a stronger position or weaker position? How will it affect our lives?
Great question or set of questions. Karen, have you got any view or thoughts, please?
I think a lot of it is still unknown. That's a problem, always the way, isn't it, at this stage of any new bill. I mentioned earlier that I was involved in some work. It was some research today with the department, and that was about infrastructure funding and infrastructure delivery statements and possibility of introducing 3 new requirements. So it is very much at an early stage at the moment. They were keen to stress that. I think on the charging levy, we've been waiting for quite some time, much to your frustration, I know, because we haven't implemented SIL earlier. This council took the decision to prioritise affordable housing over SIL some time ago. And whilst we've kept it under review, we've really been waiting, and it goes back to a point made earlier, for confirmation from the government that they were going to change it. We've heard there were changes coming for a number of years and they haven't materialised. So I welcome the idea of a simplified system and combining Section 106 and SIL. But what I don't know is how Section 106 will still be applied to large sites and what that means, because again, it feels like business as usual and there'll still be a two-tier system. So the devil is in the detail on that one. I can't find my notes about the compulsory purchase order, but I know it was intended to simplify the process. But again, I don't know that the details, there's enough detail out there for me to comment on. Perhaps we could bring a report back to the next committee. Like Beth said, we'll know a bit more about what's proposed in the MPPF, and maybe we'll get a bit more information on some of these items, or we can relate them specifically to Colchester and what that might mean.
Yeah, thank you. And also there's a point there, if there is anything that the committee wishes to see on the agenda, please do message me and I'll happily discuss that with officers as well. So I know Councillor Summit, you've got some ideas.
Well, not really.
You just want to come back.
It's very brief. It sounds as if they're running in circles. And yes, he's nodding. Karen, you mustn't nod at that. It sounds as if they're running in circles, and we should really just keep a watching brief, because some of these things could be really major if they manage to get anything through. But there's been so many other initiatives on planning change. I think we should work our future on what we've got now and then adapt if the government does change. Okay, that's incredibly important. For the first step is to get the infrastructure and inventory, and then we need to start getting smart at how to actually get the money out of the developments. And at that point, we'll need to know exactly where we are with the with all this stuff.
Yeah, Karen's going to come back, and I think you make a good point, but I think the other important piece to remember is we want to make sure that we're better off, not worse off as well, which with some of these changes, we'd have to obviously look at that carefully.
But we mustn't let ourselves be diverted by shooting stars, if you know what I mean. No,
absolutely agree.
We should work with what we've got now,
yep,
and not blame anyone else except ourselves. We've got to get our act together.
Yep.
And I think it's a two-pronged approach. So I think we need the infrastructure inventory or audit, but we also need information from parish councils and from you as ward councillors. So new councillors won't be aware, but we sent out a request for information back in December, January time, seeking information on infrastructure requirements at a local level. So some areas have responded, but many haven't. So if you can ask your parishes to follow up, that would be very welcomed.
Could you give us some more ideas on what we might be asking for? Because I think everyone just think, oh, do we need a new toilet on the village hall or something like that? Or do we need a new swimming pool? There's so many bits of infrastructure. You know, it's about what about the bus service, and what about, you know, I think it'd be really useful to have a paper that gave councillors, particularly new ones like me, a little bit more to go on as to how we might be able to help the parishes get their inventory.
I think there's also an action to come out of this. I like actions, to resend that to get some input, because clearly if that went out in December, January, we're now sitting in June. So I think if we can get that recirculated, I think you're right, we need some better examples. So I'll let Karen come back, but we will get that email sent back out to all councillors, because there's quite a new contingent as well. Karen, did you have anything else you wanted to respond on? No, okay, fine. Councillor Barber will come to you. There are other speakers.
Thank you. It was
not well. Can it wait, because we have got Councillor Laws and Councillor Smith.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
They've been waiting patiently, and then we'll have your good say. Don't worry. So Councillor Laws, then Councillor Smith, please, and then Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, in response to Mr. Chilver's comments about an infrastructure deficit, I was very sorry to hear that it took him 45 minutes to cycle from the south of Colchester, where he lives, to where he needed to go. He's quite right to highlight that we have disjointed cycling infrastructure in Colchester. I believe that officers in planning are cognizant of that. To the newer members of this panel, if you're not already cognizant of that, please get up on it, because for me, ultimately, the modes of transport in Colchester, the options, it has to be about choice. Cycling isn't for everyone every time, Just like getting on a bus isn't for everyone at every time. But we cannot pretend that at a rate of 800-900 houses a year, with all of the cars that brings, that you're going to tackle congestion by simply widening roads, because everyone wants to get to the same kind of central places at the same kind of time. And finally, because I'm really passionate about this point, I had to challenge a car driver this week who had their engine running for about 10-15 minutes, and it was right outside my son's school, and he walked within a metre of that exhaust pipe, and I challenged them politely and very firmly. You may be aware, but Ella Adu Kisi Deborah, who lived near the South Circular Road in Lewisham in southeast London, died in 2013, and an inquest found that air pollution made a material contribution to her death. She didn't have a choice. It's incumbent on us, the planners, to make sure people have a fair choice to choose to maneuver safely, but also in a way that there is no risk to them hurting themselves through the air particulates that can be problematic. It's a real live issue. And if you see people with their engines idling outside schools, have the confidence to politely have a word. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
I know it's getting late, but if I heard it correctly, I think Nick Chilvers was talking about he had to get buses and walk. I don't think he mentioned a bike. I think no. He mentioned it took him 45 minutes by, I think, 2 bus journeys and walking. So
I do apologise. I'll withdraw the sentiment. I did hear the word bicycle within that, so that's why I thought you'd attempted that as well. But I withdraw the comments.
I think the point is clarified. So thank you for that. I do appreciate people are getting tired, but we have clarified that point. I know you're very passionate about bikes. You've caught me enough times litter picking as you've cycled past near dangerous roads. Right, okay. The next speaker was Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you. I note under item 12, there's a talk about an increase in planning application fees, but the increase in fees must result in an improved planning service. If you already have a good planning service, how is this going to work? I presume it's not clear, but also, what sort of extra income to the council would we be talking of here if these figures came through?
Do we have any idea, Karen?
I can look up our income from last year. That would give us an idea, because it's 25% and 35%. I can't remember which way round, but for major applications and minor applications, there's a split difference. And then I could add on 25 or whatever once I knew the split, but it's not a figure I can give you tonight. But
can we get into the minutes and action to pull that out and circulate to the committee, please? Thank you. Thank you. And then Councillor Barber, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to ask if it was possible for us to add maybe on the next agenda, and I don't know when that is off the top of my head, but the follow-up results of maybe what comes out of the requests from parish councils or town councils about the infrastructure audit. It'd be quite useful, I think, from our perspective, to maybe go through that and to make sure we as councillors understand exactly what is being asked on the ground. I think that's important. May I just make one small comment about active travel, slightly doffing my other cap here, but I think it's really important to stress that I know both authorities are working to deliver more on sustainable transport, and it's really important because actually it was Councillor Laws once, I was complaining about the traffic somewhere and he pointed out I was the traffic. So now I try and cycle as much as possible, but not everyone has that choice. And as an authority, when it comes to planning decisions, county council as well, we really need to increase choice on sustainable transport, active travel, and I would refer to the new bus service improvement plan, which I really recommend having a look into engaging, because that will hopefully help change bus travel. It's a really important part of levelling up, and I'm hoping to speak to councils across Essex about Digigo, which is really exciting. So recommend looking into that as well. Contributions from section 106. Small plug there. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So we'll take an action point to come back to a future meeting with an update. Obviously, the first action to actually get something into that report is to chase the email and get that sent out and give an example as to what we actually need to be putting, whether it's toilet blocks or new junctions on the A12, because there's only so much you can afford, but we need to get that out. So that will be actioned. And I think, Karen, you just wanted to come back briefly.
Yes, just to let Lewis know that later this month we've got someone starting in a new post, an active environments post. So it's a sort of cross between active travel, planning, and health and well-being, and it's funded by the LDP. So I'm hoping it'll bring all those things that you were talking about together, and we can include those sorts of aspects into new plans and new developments.
Thank you. Any other speakers? If not, Councillor Kirby Taylor, please.
Thank you. There's two quick queries. Have we got any detail on item 5, the gateway checks on local plans? Do we have any idea what the kind of method of enforcement of the 30-month limit on implementation might be? And item 20, the registered parks and gardens gaining the same level of plan protection as listed buildings. Does that signal a more general change towards moving planning offences to criminal out of civil law?
Okay, two good questions. I think from the shaking of heads, I think the answer to question 1 is no, from what I could see. So I can answer that for you, but there is no detail. So I'm afraid the answer is no at this moment in time, or unknown, or not applicable. And then the other question, I'll let Karen deal with that one.
Yes, I think it can only be good news about the historic parks and gardens, but it will increase the level of protection afforded to them. Interesting point actually about making it a criminal offence, because apart from listed buildings and bizarrely adverts, planning isn't generally a legal matter. So I suspect that is the intention, but it will increase those penalties. And the other aspect under there about the duty to maintain a historic environment record, we do already do that. So we have something to build on, which is useful.
Okay, thank you. The 2 longest local plan meetings I've ever chaired were till 11 o'clock. We can go on till 11 if you want and carry on talking about this, or if there are no other speakers, that does bring us to the end of the agenda. Okay, thank you, everyone. It has been a long meeting. I think it's been a good debate. I appreciate it was a difficult decision that we had to take under item 7, and I think we obviously did give that the respect and airing that it needed and required. That will now go off to full council in July, and obviously it will now be up to the 50 councillors that are standing or who arrive at that meeting to make that final decision on whether we adopt the local plan or not. And I believe that will be Councillor Luxford-Vaughan that has the duty to move that as the portfolio holder. So that will be for her to do. The next meeting is the 15th of August, where we should have some agenda items. I wish you all well, and thank you for attending this evening, to both the public and the committee, and to officers who have worked really hard to get us to this point. So I wish you all a safe journey home, and best wishes to everybody. Thank you.